Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 309 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on the 22nd of August, 2026. This is the official podcast for the fan site, Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com. I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So on today's podcast, it's pretty kind of packed. We'll see how it goes here. We do have a decent amount of news to cover. Then we'll be getting into our review for the Kaya comic that did come out in the middle of all the SDCC craziness. And then we'll also be continuing our Aang movie coverage by attempting to roughly go through about kind of half the movie here. But we'll see how we go with that. But yeah, we'll get into the news. I thought after the last show that there really wouldn't be all that much news, that would kind of be a calm before the storm as we get much closer to Seven Havens, but there actually has been a lot of stuff happening. So maybe the surprising one here is just that we already have the New York Comic Con 2026 panels revealed for Avatar. So almost like a month and a half beforehand, we have what seems to be the full lineup already, but we'll see if they add anything else. But for now, the way it is here is that we have the publishing panel. There's a publishing panel signing just after that. And then there is a big Avatar 7 Havens panel. So the publishing panel is Thursday, October 8th, 4:15 p.m. to 5 p.m. in room 1B02. And then the big panel, Avatar 7 Havens, is Friday, October 9th from 11:15 to 12:15 at Hall 1D main stage here. So, no sign of the merch panels that they did last time. I wonder what's kind of going on there, but still really cool that they seem to be going just as big at New York Comic Con. We'll get into the details in just a second, but what are your thoughts on this kind of similar showing here for the next convention?
Yeah, I think this is pretty much what we were expecting to have at sort of like bare minimum. The merch one is always kind of up in the air, and I feel like that still needs more things to happen for that to really be as effective. So it feels like that was kind of just like too early to have so much of that as we had before. But no, I'm looking forward to these.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the publishing panel has the exact same description that it has had for the last 10 years. They sometimes swap out what companies are involved, and it's the same ones here: Abrams, Dark Horse, Webtoon, and Magpie Games. Webtoon especially are quickly running out of stuff to kind of cover on the platform, because I think they're already pretty far through Turf Wars, and it really only leaves Runes of the Empire and the one shots that we're still in the process of doing. I think the timing should be a bit better for news at this publishing panel, just because a lot of the releases will be done by the time we get here. Like the Jet comic will be out the month before. Next week is Masters of the Elements Volume 1. And that leaves, I think, the Kyoshi Collected Edition, the graphic novel version, collecting all 3 issues. That's the only thing I think that's currently on the schedule that isn't out yet and will be out after this panel. So no new content books on the schedule. And all we have from SDCC was a teaser of there will be more Kyoshi Warrior comics, and Brandon Huang is also doing a Korra comic. So it kind of really feels like Dark Horse need to announce what's next. Volume 2 of Masters of the Elements, the next Korra comic, probably even the next Avatar comic after Jet, because that team should be a bit more efficient and on top of things, so that book can't be too far away. And then, of course, the big one is that, Abrams, with the movie novel and the movie art book, they haven't really focused on the other novel series this year. Now, what has happened since the last show is that a blank listing has gone up in a bunch of places for an untitled book, but very clearly it says that it's Chronicles of the Avatar, and it's scheduled for July 20th next year. It would be still somewhat early to announce it here, but it kind of feels like they're almost setting the stage for it to be announced, and I'm almost assuming that it's basically done or kind of ready to go. But we'll see what happens there. What would your expectations be for the publishing panel this time out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. A lot of the more novel stuff is usually what we would get, and you said it does feel like the timing is better, but I don't know. It feels like they're still waiting for some things to drop, so I'm not sure, the new projects. I mean, I really would want like another series or something along those lines, but that very seems unlikely the way that they're sort of doling stuff out right now. So no, I mean, I expect them to talk about the novelization and the art books and, probably have some on display, maybe sale or no, early releases or whatever. Maybe they'll give away some. That would be cool. I think they've done that once or twice in the past. But yeah, I don't know. The publishing panels are always kind of hit or miss, even when they do have things that are kind of interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, and this one's kind of interesting. It's only scheduled for 45 minutes. Now, usually they don't have 45 minutes worth of content, I suppose, is sort of the idea. And they've really shied away from like doing anything resembling like Q&A. They don't want people to ask questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but like, are they just going to repeat what they did before? It kind of feels like they have to do a little bit more. But we'll see what happens there. But yeah, the big one here is the Avatar 7 Havens panel. So here's the description of this. Four nations fans unite for the ultimate celebration of Avatar 7 Havens on its premiere day. Join the creative team behind the all-new Paramount Plus series for an exclusive glimpse into how they brought Seven Havens to life and what lies ahead for Pavi, the new Avatar, as her journey begins. Plus, hear more about what's in store for the Avatar Legends universe. Yip yip. So basically, they're doing what they did at Comic-Con, just with the next project. The panel is focused on Seven Havens. At SDCC, it was focused on the movie, but they're also teasing that there will be some news about theoretically what's next. Now, we'll get into what that could be in a moment, and one of the next news topics as well is kind of about that. But what would your expectations be for this? Because it's a really interesting one here with the panel being on the day Seven Havens like drops. Now, we still don't know how much of it is dropping. Is it one episode, two, three? Is it just all of season one? Is it the full 26 episode run? No idea about that. But what would your expectations be for the panel itself? The Seven Havens section of the panel?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, this panel is not that long really, and it's early in the day too as well. So I don't know how much they're really going to feature because, like, typically I would think they would do like an episode or maybe even two, and then do their talking and stuff. But with the length of time of this one and it being earlier, and it, dropping that day as well. Not that we know how much of it, like you said. I'm not sure how much. I mean, the normal behind the scenes and them sort of, explaining the process and, looking at concept art and, all of that sort of stuff feels like that's like standard fare that they would do, regardless, assuming that they're, in the time frame when they can sort of talk about that stuff, which this, would be the time that they could, if anything, because it does come out then. So I don't know. I'm really wondering what more they're going to do, as well as, sort of the future stuff as well, if they're ready to talk about that stuff. Because, I mean, I don't know. A lot of that stuff, it doesn't feel like it's as farther along in the process, even though they have mentioned before that they, they already have other stuff in the works and they're just waiting for the go ahead. So I don't know. Maybe this would be where we would actually get the sort of like go ahead for those future projects. But then again, they're still sort of like waiting for feedback on things. So I don't know how much of that I would really expect here. But I think it's good that they are, at least speaking a little bit more towards the future versus the other one was, generally more focused on the movie since that was what's coming out.
Yeah, it's just interesting the way it's worked out, and like it feels like a very obvious thing to talk about it on the day it comes out, but it's as we've seen sort of at times with like the publishing panels, like if you drop the novel the day the publishing panel is, like you can't really talk about it because of spoilers, and it's kind of the same thing here where I'm guessing it'll be very basic concept art stuff, like almost to a certain degree the stuff that was part of like the original Seven Havens leak from like 2 years ago. Like, are we just going to see that maybe sort of stuff again? Obviously I'm guessing like they'll when the full trailer comes out, they'll introduce more of the characters, because like we have actors for characters that we've never seen before. So like there'll be those characters to talk about. Like I think the full trailer will just reveal a whole different aspect to this show we haven't even speculated about right now. Because even I think when you factor all the leaks together, we maybe know what's going to happen in like episode 1, and some of the teases surrounding like the twins and what the Avatar, are they both the Avatar type thing, and even then that's not super concrete. The actual what we're doing episode to episode we still don't know about, so there's that stuff to kind of talk about as well. They could drop some kind of interesting information teasing like details surrounding like the other Haven cities, which again haven't really been dived into all that much. And yeah, I'm guessing it'll be a different panel here, a different creative team here. I assume it will still be Mike and Brian, but you're going to have the whole creative team that's more working on Seven Havens, plus some of those voice actors, I guess, being on panels for the first time, which will be interesting by itself. But yeah, inevitably we're going to be talking about kind of news here just because the show's dropping on the day. What's in store for the Avatar Legends universe? That definitely reads as like there has to be a bit of like a news section. And what is there? If they've already, the Aang movie's already out, Seven Havens drops, and we'll know going in how much of it is dropping and how that will all work. So the only real things that they probably could announce would be the now heavily rumored and expected Seven Havens season 3 and 4. That'd be a very obvious thing to do at the Seven Havens panel, because it seems like production is well underway on whatever season 3 is. So that would be an announcement. There is the Avatar Kurok Wave of Chaos, which we will get to in a moment, and that was definitely the series they were talking about as the thing that they were just waiting for the right time to announce at SDCC. And yeah, it kind of feels like if we're starting one show, you kind of need to sort of set the stage for what's ahead. That's always been the Avatar Studios thing, that they're working on a lot of stuff. But yeah, the exact timing is so difficult to kind of know what the full situation is. But yeah, what are your thoughts there? Do you have any expectations for the remaining seasons, basically, of Seven Havens or the Kurok show?
I don't know. It's tough because it's not really like they won't know sort of like the reception. Like, I mean, it's weird because like they know the reception for the movie, right? Like we know how popular that is and everything like that. So it feels like that would be sort of like a boost towards them, sort of getting the okay on these future things, which it feels like they are closer to talking about it, but I don't know, corporate, it feels like it's still like sort of a bit of a waiting game, but I would hope that they would be able to sort of like talk a little bit more about what those are, even if they're not going to give us anything specific, considering sort of the rumors and stuff is out there. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how they play off of that, or if they, really acknowledge that to a larger degree.
And then, like, if it is just a general news section and it's not maybe a big piece of news, there's still like, what are you really talking about here? Because the only things I can think of is we've had the early kind of tease that there will be a Blu-ray for the Aang movie. The Twitter account that seems to have it be in the know mentioned that could be something they announced that would actually be quite exciting. Otherwise, it feels like the video game, would they have an announcement here necessarily, because it'll be a few weeks before the physical release of the fighting game, and yeah, I guess they wouldn't, depending on where they are with patches. Like, we don't know if like new characters will be in at that point just yet, so it doesn't really feel like that's on the table necessarily. So what other things would they necessarily be really talking about here is the other aspect. Like, I'm guessing, Seven Haven soundtrack is something that you'll have to get towards, but I'm guessing we'll find out about that in the coming weeks. Otherwise, it's like, I'm not really sure what the other kind of aspect of this news is, other than just recapping, like, the movie art book will be out the following month. The movie novelization will be out the following month. Is Seven Havens getting any publishing? That would be a potential big publishing announcement that would be worth talking about here. We'll see about that. But yeah, I suppose while we're here talking about Seven Havens, there hasn't been like a ton of Seven Havens news, but like I said, some more teases towards the idea that there probably is a season 3 and 4 of Seven Havens. A production coordinator mentioned on their CV that they worked on over 30 episodes of Seven Havens, and we only are confirmed at the moment for 26. So that's another thing, and that's happened a few times now at this point. a new image came out for Seven Havens because they did put the actual official page for Seven Havens up on Paramount Plus. So you can now kind of like add the show to your list ahead of the release. And they have basically a kind of poster style image that includes Pavi and Nisha in front of Alora, I guess. It's a nice image. It's a really kind of clean, kind of stock image, key art style stuff. It looks, I think, really cool. They didn't make a big fuss about it. It almost seems like it went up a little early or something like that because they don't think they've still officially posted about it. But it's cool that it's there. Do you have any thoughts on that image that came out?
Yeah, I did see that. I thought that was pretty cool. It is a very, neat image. I mean, it fits well for what we know of things so far. But yeah, it feels like it's just sort of a thing where they just put it up on sort of their site just to have it up there as like a placeholder, but wasn't really like promoting it yet or anything, which I guess I could kind of see why they're not doing it super hard yet, because it's not really, the trailers and stuff. There's not like the big trailer yet for it. So I don't know. Soon.
Yeah, and then that is, I think, the next port of call. Is like, when are they actually going to start the marketing properly for Seven Havens? The things we would be expecting, of course, full trailer, because the first one was very much a teaser. There's so many characters that we haven't seen. We don't really know what the premise necessarily fully is about, outside of a few mysteries. So that needs to come out. And then I think the thing that everyone's a little bit worried about, like almost more so than the visuals of the trailer, will be, what way is this being released? How many episodes are we getting here? Because no one, it seems like, wants all 26 on the same day. That, I think even people who are into binge watching shows, that's just a lot. No, like, everyone's going to have a hard time kind of getting through all that much stuff all at once. Are they going to do the first full season all at once and then build to whenever the second season is? Or will they do the more, what I think people want, what fans want, it would definitely help us on the podcast and stuff like that, is a kind of weekly release. I think people will be okay if they launched with a couple of episodes to start off, 2 or 3, but we want to speculate on this mystery show over the course of a couple of weeks. But where are you at now that we're kind of just a few weeks out, like as in, I'm guessing in about like 3 weeks we'll maybe have the trailer or something like that. But what do you expect for that kind of release cadence?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, personally, I would definitely like, a 2 episode to start and then continue weekly from there until, they're done with stuff, just because I think that kind of builds up and that would, give people, something to look forward to watch every week. But considering how media consumption is going these days, I don't know. I definitely could see them doing like a season at a time and waiting for that to sort of die down just to keep things going. But I don't know. I'm not really sure of Paramount's sort of like streaming media strategy and how they sort of do things normally to know as much as I would want to for their cadence and their rollout sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Because even one season, it just means like, how do we cover that on the podcast? That's just like it's a lot of stuff to try and cover that. So I hope they make it as kind of easy for fans as possible. Especially because of all the mysteries. Like, I think it would be really rough if they just dropped everything all at once. And so the people who get to it the quickest, they're just throwing the spoilers out there for these like huge mysteries potentially. But that's that. We'll get more news on Seven Havens in the coming weeks. We'll see how it goes. But let's get into some rumored information next. So I mentioned Avatar Kuruk Wave of Chaos earlier on. What's the deal with that? Viacom filed some new trademarks very recently, and they were found, of course, for Avatar Kuruk Wave of Chaos. Specifically, it was 3 separate kind of filings. One was for like kind of toy merchandise, one was for like t-shirt merchandise, and then the main one was for an entertainment product that is like a series of animation that will be on a video on demand service, something like that. Very clearly translated as like, okay, streaming series. That's the way it kind of came across. And since then, that's the only like official statement about it. It's a trademark that's out there for something that is very clearly a series. Now you can connect the dots a little bit, but Night Age Media, who's pretty good with the kind of early rumored information, insider sources, is seemingly coming out there and confirming that this show is the previously rumored Red Thunder Water Tribe series. There's a little bit of an extra element in here, with the idea being that Red Thunder itself, as a concept of a series, got reworked into a series called Metal Mountain, and Metal Mountain is actually what Wave of Chaos is. It seems like Paramount wanted the show to skew a bit younger than the previous idea, which was a little bit more Legend of Korra in tone, in that it seemed like it was going to have a whole Ice Age thing and be a little bit more on the darker side of things. Now it seems like it's going to be more of a swashbuckling adventure series. The most of this then is more based on casting call information. So there's 2 casting calls, one from 2024, one from 2025. And I think the way it ends up working out is the 2024 one seems to be more what Red Thunder was, and then I guess the 2025 one is more what Korra Metal Mountain is. So 2024, it said, a teenager ventures into mysterious lands cursed by ice, only to discover his former teacher and now hunter is behind it all. Now he must break the curse and free the world, all while having a little chaotic fun along the way. The newer one, from 2025, is a rebellious teenager books thousands of years of tradition to go on globe-trotting adventures, staying one step ahead of his angry teacher, rowdy pirates, and chaotic gremlins, all while helping the world in his own unique ways. Again, remember, this comes from casting call information, so they hide all the IP-based kind of details by kind of like just making them random stuff. So chaotic gremlins likely means avatar animals or dark spirits or something like that. That's the whole idea here. But this seems to confirm that the whole stuff that we had from before about what Red Thunder is actually the Korra show. And this would also be the show that Mike and Brian have been talking about at Comic-Con, as in this is the one Brian's been kind of heavily involved in, and they're just waiting to announce. This seems to be the furthest along thing, and very likely what project number 3 is actually going to be. Obviously, it's the usual thing with rumored information. Take it with a grain of salt, but it seems fairly clear-cut, I think, at this point, that this is kind of what we're doing. But what are your thoughts on this? I guess, first of all, just the Wave of Chaos trademark. What way do you interpret that just kind of popping up and being found?
Yeah, it's funny how those always get found rather quickly once they go up there. And I don't know, I mean, it's the title stuff sounds cool. I mean, it sounds Avatar related and all that sort of stuff. So, I can get what's, behind the title itself. But yeah, as far as it, flowing with stuff that we've seen before for characters and stuff that haven't gotten as much information about, I think it's cool. I think it's something that I would potentially look forward to, assuming that it goes forward and everything like that. I mean, it seems pretty, solid as of now, but, they have filed trademarks before, and nothing has come from them. So just because you have the name doesn't necessarily mean I think it's always something that's going to be, but, it seems pretty solid as of now. So I just wonder, what's the sort of timeline for it?
Yeah, that is the interesting thing. It is interesting we do have like very similar leaked information on Seven Havens, like casting call information, quite similar to this, and so it feels like it's kind of just offset by like kind of 2 or 3 years. So like we'll see how long it takes Seven Havens to air, but like it looks fairly good for this being like the next thing for, I don't know, probably 2028, I guess, depending on how many seasons we end up confirmed for with Seven Havens, but we don't really know too much about it. The other thing to make clear about this, because I one of the things from the article, the usual thing is like people not really reading the full articles and just picking out pieces and stuff like that. The whole idea is that like Paramount wanted the series that skews younger, without reading that the previous line in the article says, well, the previous idea was that it would be in the vein of Legend of Korra in tone, so it just skews younger than Korra, which to me is just like ATLA. Like Paramount want an ATLA-like show to capture that more like traveling adventure show, and the idea seems to be that this would be a young Korra traveling out at sea to sort of, I guess, start his Avatar adventure in a kind of way that goes against tradition. Now, there's some continuity stuff in relation to what we know about like Korra's early days at the Avatar, but like that early section of Shadow of Kyoshi is like quite broad, quite vague. It doesn't really go into a lot of detail. and this seems to actually be like before he meets his team. I think the casting call is meant to be for like a 14-year-old character, whereas I think more so the idea is that Karuk is maybe leaning more towards 16 when he's fully announced as the Avatar. There might be some retconning stuff going on here, but like it'd be just to ease kind of room for like a story here. Some people are freaking out about this. I don't really see it as being that big of a problem. One of the interesting kind of leaked bits of information here seems to be that the main antagonist of the show would be from the Water Tribe and might be the mother of the Karuk's kind of Water Tribe friend, but that the secondary antagonist would be the Fifth Nation pirate fleet. So, you know, the kind of Tagaka pirate group, Dao Fei group. It's unclear if Tagaka necessarily would be involved, though I think timeline-wise she could be included if required. And that seems very interesting, just that idea that they have multiple different antagonists in place, a show where we can travel, we're in the Water Tribe over here, we're out at sea over here, and who knows where else we can go. I think this is the sort of thing we've kind of maybe missed a little bit from Avatar, that we might have a more character-driven show where it does get to be a bit more, I think, episode of the week is kind of what it kind of says in the article here. So I'd be relatively kind of okay with that. Like, I assume there would still be like an overarching plot that we eventually build towards, but I don't inherently view this as being like, though I see the word younger and have a freak out like a lot of people are having online. But what are your thoughts on this idea of like a more adventure driven show that might have room for some more one-off episodes?
Yeah, I saw a lot of people talking about that as well. And yeah, I mean, Young and Korra doesn't feel like it's going to, you know, sort of like Nick Jr. status or anything like that. It feels like it's closer, like you said, closer to the original series, which if they're able to sort of keep the same tone and maturity that, you know, the original one have, then I think it would be fine. And I think people would be into it just as much as they are into any of the other things. I feel like some people might even prefer that, you know, compared to Korra, you know, in terms of how they do the story and stuff like that. So, no, I think it should be pretty cool. I mean, I think the general idea of what they're proposing here, if true and everything, no, it feels along the same lines as what we've seen. I think it's good that they're going to focus potentially on more than one, on mainly sort of like one area, one tribe, because I think that will, you know, differentiate it a bit from Aang and his series, since he was all around the world and stuff like that, especially if this is before he's sort of like fully realized as the Avatar. So no, I think this sounds potentially pretty cool if they can go through with it and everything.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll see if they make an announcement about that at some point. Even if they don't, I guess it's one of the ones we maybe would expect at the cons next year or something like that. Because yeah, there likely is still 2 more seasons of Seven Havens to be announced, and that's a pretty big announcement if they do it. Especially if they maybe add in like a little bit of a teaser. Like, I think a lot of people will be excited if they even just tease the idea that like you'll see Pavi older in season 3 and 4, because that seems to be a lot of the kind of concern again within the fandom, is like younger, the characters being younger or the tone being younger is a major problem for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. The other thing that was also coming out is also related to rumored information, but this time it's about the scrapped Fire Lord Zuko movie. I think there's kind of 2 articles. One has more of a kind of general idea, and then one seems to have a little bit more details. But again, the idea is right up until like December last year, the plan was always for there to be 3 movies from Avatar Studios. And yeah, it seems like the second one was absolutely going to be the Zuko movie. And yeah, it was scrapped. The basic idea seems to be that somewhat early in the Aang movie production, they were working on developing a script, and they're, I guess, trying to get that movie pipeline kind of going, but it seems like there was some issues kind of fully getting the script together. Again, we're talking very early days here. There's no exact date given, but it seems to be like 2021 based on some of the stuff we know about early Aang movie production. So this is not this thing that was borderline complete and then got scrapped. I think even at the end of the article it mentions that the studio never finalized a script, and then Paramount paused it with the production, and now of course we're not even focused on movies. So this is from a while ago, like a whole other era of Avatar Studios we're kind of talking about here. But the basic idea of this movie would be that it'd be adult Zuko, of course. I'm guessing the timeline would be quite similar to the Aang movie. It basically would be a sequel to it. And the idea is that there would be an assassination attempt against Zuko and Iroh. And either before or after this, Ran and Shaw would be murdered by the same assassin. Azula would also be involved in the plot somewhere. And that was, I think, the first article that came out, just giving us a broad idea. The second article with more details seems to highlight that the actual plot of the movie, who the assassin is, it would have been an origin story for the Red Lotus, with that assassin being revealed to be Zhai Bao, the founder of the Red Lotus. And the idea is that this would have been where Iroh really comes into play in the plot, because of course Zhai Bao and Iroh would know each other from the White Lotus, and it seems, the implication seems to be that he would have been Fire Nation, I guess, as well, based on the kind of context of all this stuff. And it seems like we'd go in depth on some backstory on Iroh, highlighting what he was like as a general before he kind of changed his ways, but also contrasting the potential for him in the future as well. That whole sort of idea. And yeah, it'd be setting up the whole Red Lotus philosophy. It'd lead to the two of them having a final confrontation in the spirit world, apparently. And it seems like it never really kind of got further than that. There's some other ideas kind of thrown around here about how they kind of struggled with incorporating Azula into the plot, because it seems like they didn't really know what direction they wanted to take Azula in. And I think it speaks to how early this is, that they really didn't settle on a clear idea. That's how early it actually was. Because there's speculation here about they were wondering if they could incorporate Zahir in, which feels like these reports are kind of coming from really that anything being thrown out there as potential ideas type stage. What do you make of this? A potential Zuko movie, and it would have been Red Lotus origin story.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, on the surface, I think, some of these ideas definitely sound cool, and I like how they're, trying to interconnect it and give us sort of the origin story of the Red Lotus and stuff like that, which, plenty of people have, mentioned that they thought that would be a cool thing to have and stuff like that. So it sounds like they have a lot of bits and pieces of what people have been talking about over the years, but like you said, it seems like they never really got to the point where they were really sort of, flushed and confident with the story, and they just sort of let it go from there, which I think, with it being such early in this process and them having, a lot of things on their mind and just really being the beginning of things, it's not surprising that some of the ideas that they had sort of fell to the wayside. I'm sure they had plenty of other ideas that we probably will never even know about, that didn't even get this sort of far in development here. So I don't know. I mean, I think it definitely sounds like it's something that could have been cool for a next movie and stuff like that. So it's not something that I would disregard in any regard there, especially now that we've seen some animation and images of an older Zuko. So of course that not being a thing, with what we have, now it feels like it's sort of like a tease for what could have been, even though this was never even a thing. Probably they didn't even have any of the work they have on, the current movie of, Zuko and stuff when they were sort of discussing these sort of ideas. So yeah, I mean, I think, it definitely has potential. But, there's a lot of things that they have to work with it in order to make it have really sense. And yeah, I think, Azula has always been sort of a tough spot for the fandom and just in general in terms of what would you do with her, what would her arc be, does she, what happens with her reception of everybody. So yeah, there's a lot there that they would have to sort of figure out, which it feels like they just didn't get to that point.
Yeah, and I think that's the main takeaway that I've seen online, is just that everyone's kind of pointing out this really seems like this would never have worked in a 90-minute movie. It kind of seems like two movies in one. You would have needed to have Azula be the kind of reveal maybe at the end of the first movie, and then she'd be the focus of a second one, or have it just be a series. And it speaks to, I suppose where we are right now, post Aang movie. Everyone wants more adult gang content, and Zuko does make sense to be the focus of kind of whatever the next thing is, because the Fire Nation kind of family stuff kind of needs to be explored. So something along these lines, a more kind of clear-cut idea from this, I'd be fairly happy with. It's just, yeah, if you're doing the Iroh thing with the Red Lotus, the White Lotus, give that the focus. If you're doing Azula, give it the focus. I think especially with Azula, you can't kind of just throw her into the plot. Because I think people are already a little bit frustrated that they haven't fully committed to an exact direction for her as a character. So if they just did that in a movie, I think people would be quite annoyed. That she's just kind of spinning her wheels even in like a big piece of content. But we'll see where this all goes. I assume at the moment behind the scenes at Paramount, they're probably making those decisions about like, okay, we need to do something to follow up the Aang movie, but like, what do we do it? At what budget? Should we turn it into a series? You know, do we do a streaming movie? They're all the sort of things. But what are your expectations sort of on that? Like post Aang movie, it's clearly been a success despite all the problems. What do you think's happening at the moment behind the scenes when it comes to like the potential follow up to the Aang movie?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really would, I would enjoy more movies for sure, but it feels like the process for this movie was such a tumultuous one that it's not something that they want to, revisit in any, form or fashion right now. So I don't know, it feels like definitely the series and all that sort of ideas, which, I think many people have mentioned, and I could see it working too as well. This working as more of a series or episodic thing. But I don't know, the more, even though, Zuko is, the most popular characters of the series, the more, it's also getting more and more sort of focus on things, which, has less of a broad of audience. So yeah, there's a ton of people watching it, but is there a ton enough for whatever metrics they have in order to, make it worth their while and making that sort of thing? That's where, I sort of wonder, and that's what, I'm sure they're figuring in terms of, producing any of these sort of additional pieces of content. And also, again, that is, as much as, I would like more of it, like that's stuff in the past, like, that's going backwards in time, and, that also has to fit in with everything that comes afterwards as well. So, that's more of them having to deal with, sort of fitting into a specific block of time and making sure everything lines up as well as it potentially can, without sort of like, retriggering things or retconning things afterwards, which seems like they don't really want to deal with anymore. So I don't know, as much as I like Zuko, how much they really want to go that route.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. There's clearly some stuff that they'd have to deal with when it comes to like, I think the article went over the idea, they threw around the idea of like, oh, should Iroh die in this movie? But that's where like, oh yeah, we have some sense for when that happened. They didn't say specifically when Iroh kind of chose to become a spirit, but it wouldn't be when Zuko's in his 20s. Like there's things like that, and that's where it really feels like that's how early this process is, that they're really just choking out ideas before they've even like gone through the whole process of like the continuity people at Avatar Studios kind of really dealing with it. But yeah, that's that news. Final piece of news we'll cover here is just that, hey, we've been waiting on this thing for a very, very long time, and they just announced that it is actually going to happen out of like absolutely nowhere. The Spirit World RPG book, it's going to be a settings toolkit book like the Republic City book. It is going to actually be coming out after years of it, just no sign of it. They're going to do a Kickstarter in the late fall, no exact date yet, for this book. And yeah, they just put out a basic kind of email to people who were subscribed to the Magpie email. And yeah, it's going to cover all the stuff about rules for incorporating the Spirit World into the game. It'll have lore on the Spirit World. It'll go in detail on notable spirits that are in the world. And the interesting stuff is that they mention that like they're specifically highlighting like, oh, it's been a really long time since we talked to you about our plans for the RPG and the Spirit World, and we've worked with Avatar Studios for 5 years on this expansion. So it's kind of like, does that mean like 5 years of continuous work, or is that just like including delays, times where it maybe wasn't a major focus? I understand why you would probably need to do quite a lot of detailed back and forth to kind of put like accurate information on Spirit World kind of stuff into a book, because it's the most kind of like open side of the kind of magic system in Avatar, whereas there's more clear-cut rules surrounding bending. The spirit world stuff is very like, okay, if we're going to commit to this, we need to have major discussions about this. But I'm interested to see what the scope of that is. And then because they're doing a Kickstarter, it's kind of like, that feels like it sets the stage for like, so the book's basically done then, because you've worked on it for like 5+ years. So this Kickstarter basically has to be just a fancy pre-order. So if they're delaying stuff because of like production issues, it's going to be a bit like, because of writing issues, it's going to be a bit of a weird one. But what are your thoughts on this, the Spirit World book at long last?
Yeah, this was now such a long time ago, but no, I'm glad that they're able to actually come through with it and actually notify people and just get it out there, because it seems like many people were really looking forward to this. And I think part of it's just it being based on the spirit world that has like a more sort of unique appeal than some of the other stuff that they've done before. So which I don't know if that really means it should have taken as long as it did to take, but I'm glad they're working with the studio and everything like that to make sure that it aligns and things like that. So no, I'm curious to see how well this is going to do, because I mean, Avatar feels like it's more popular than ever, but this is also more of like a very sort of like niche type of product as well. So I don't know, it'll be curious to see how well it does.
Yeah, like they're doing this themselves, so this one won't be like, I suppose, as niche as Voyage of the Unity, which still isn't out yet. So I'm assuming they'll have that more detailed in the future. Like, I think it's meant to be this year, but like, I think it's not going to hit the September they said it would be. So because it's going to be a weird thing. People are going to mention the idea of, hey, we don't even have Voyage of the Unity yet. Why are we doing a Kickstarter for this book? It's going to come up unless they sort that out. But yeah, it's exciting. Obviously the original RPG did really, really well on Kickstarter. And it was kind of at a point where like there wasn't that much really happening as well for Avatar. So the idea that like Avatar's kind of back now, but it is a very specific spirit world book. If they put out the right promo art to hype this up, and they have like the really important hyped spirits, and there's maybe some cool physical items as well as like bonuses if it hits certain stretch goals. Yeah, I can see this actually doing fairly well. Especially if they maybe can reveal that like, oh, this will include some of the content from like the Aang movie or Seven Havens or something like that. Seven Havens is probably a little bit much, because that would require like a whole era expansion basically, probably. But like the Aang movie information would be kind of cool. But we'll see how that goes. I'm guessing that's probably more like end of October, November, more so when that will be. But always interesting to follow those Kickstarters. But yeah, that's basically it for the news. There's been a bunch of other small stuff as well, but that's it for the big stuff. We'll get into our first review here, which is the Kaya comic here, which I wanted to make sure that we covered on the podcast, just because this has been the release that's been probably the most heavily affected by Paramount swapping everything around, bringing the movie up, even bringing Seven Havens up. Is that clearly all the books positioned themselves around a fall release for the Aang movie, and now they didn't want the Kaya comic to be like last of maybe 3 or 4 things on the list, but it kind of ended up being that way. So it's a little bit unfortunate that kind of has ended up happening. If this book had come out in like January, February, March, I think it would have actually hit quite well, but unfortunately it feels a little bit forgotten, even though it's a pretty good book, as we'll kind of get into here. But yeah, we're going to review this. So this is Legend of Korra, Kaya and the Secret of the Sand. This is Korra one-shot comic number 2 of 3. Still don't know the theming of this series necessarily, other than that I guess it's backstory of some sort. Mako and Bolin were the first one. Kaya is the focus here. We have no idea what the third one is. Script by Kiku Hughes, art by Alexandria Monique, colors by Diana Sousa, lettering by Richard Starkings, and Comicraft's Jimmy Betancourt. We'll start with general thoughts, and then we'll kind of go through it kind of roughly kind of scene by scene. But in general, Greg, what were your thoughts on Kaya and the Secret of the Sand?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think it was an okay comic. I think, it's unfortunate that there's so much other noise going on that it sort of gets lost by the wayside here, and it's sort of, very sort of focused on it. But I think, it does a good job at least of showing, one point in Korra's recovery when she was feeling very sort of down on herself, and, Kaya trying to express, share a story that sort of helped her in one of her sort of low moments in her life. And, it's not exactly one to one or anything like that, but it shows the importance of having sort of connections and how they can support you and how you can sort of, overcome some sort of trials in your life here. And I think, by the end of it, I think Korra gets a better idea of, sort of what she can be in the future. And it feels like something that, Kai would do. It feels like something that, would have happened behind the scenes that, you wouldn't necessarily, get in the series because it would be, would detract for other things going on. But I think in this format, it works pretty well. And it does give us a little bit more information just about sort of the time and the development, just sort of during Aang's time and during the kids' time and sort of what was going on in that period of time. So, no, I think it adds something to what we, previously didn't know about sort of the world in this era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a pretty solid book. Is it one of the absolute best one-shots we've ever had? I think there's a few that I put ahead of this, but I think it's pretty solid. It helps that Kaya hadn't had that much focus elsewhere, so her kind of seeing a younger Kaya here, getting the spotlight. Plus, like you talked about, the benefit of the kind of framing device of Kaya telling the story to Korra is nice to just get a bit of Korra, because on that Korra side of the fandom, people are pretty desperate for some more Korra. And, when we get these one-shots, which almost by default have to not really focus on her, it is frustrating because we just get so few Korra comics in general. But this was pretty nice. Yeah, we get some Sandbender lore here, some interesting world building in the middle of this. And then, the kind of political landscape in this kind of middle era that we don't know that much about is kind of interesting overall. It hits a nice enough kind of beat by the end, but it's just a pretty solid comic that, again, will be helped if it was maybe positioned a little bit better in the year overall, and if the release schedule, I think, was a bit better for Korra comics, because the point that we were making earlier on is just when's the next one? Based on this, our expectations will be that the next one will be in a year and a half, and that feels kind of crazy for how relatively small this is for typically a one-a-year style book. Now making it one every year and a half. What's going on here to cause this much problems? We know for the Mako comic that there was some issue with the art with Alexandria Monique. She kind of came out and said that it was kind of mostly on her. Is that still the case, or is this part of it's the year the movie came out, everything's a bit messy, we just positioned it months after it probably could have come out? What are your thoughts on the release schedule, specifically on these Korra comics at the moment?
Yeah, I think it just got sort of deprioritized. I think it's, despite, there might be some issues with production and sort of that sort of things, which that seems to go along with everything these days. So, I wouldn't be surprised if that, didn't factor into this in some regard. But yeah, I think other things just took more precedence than, sort of the Korra comics and everything like that. So this just sort of got a little bit pushed to the wayside with everything else sort of going on, which, again, like you're saying, is very sort of unfortunate, because people were really looking forward to Korra comics, and even just from the initial sort of switch of them becoming one-shots, people were already put down. So I don't know, it definitely feels like a little bit more of a insult here that it just sort of, it's even less sort of prominent considering everything else that's sort of going on, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. But let's get into the book. So like we said, we actually open up not with young Kaya, but with Korra in her bed during her recovery in the Southern Water Tribe, in between book 3 and 4 of Korra here. So very interesting here. She's in a bad way. Naga's kind of at the foot of her bed. Kaya walks in, and basically they try to get her to walk again. And it seems like this is a stage for Korra where her recovery, she's not really making much progress. She would like it to be quicker, but it's going very slowly. She doesn't feel like she's making any progress, and she kind of feels that this is just how she's going to be from here on. And Kaya has to be the one here to kind of reassure her here. The idea that, like, hey, I'm old, like, you're young, like, you've got so much ahead of you. And she talks about that sometimes our lives change so quickly, so drastically, that it feels impossible to keep on living with everything turned so upside down. But we have to keep living, even after the greatest upheavals, and we have to find a way to keep going here. And the big point that this book is going to emphasize is the idea, if we're lucky enough to have our community with us, we can keep going together. And so this prompts where did Kaya learn this lesson from? She's going to tell Korra this story when she was younger. She specifically says, it all started when I was about your age, and we're going to go into this backstory here. Korra's a bit like, well, I'm trapped here. I guess I have to listen to it, but she will actually listen to the story here. So yeah, what are your thoughts here on this initial framing scene here ahead of the backstory?
No, I think this is a good setup. I mean, it's, it's sad to think of Korra at this sort of low point or moment, which, we saw a little bit of this during the show. So we can, we already have like actual like visual reference of this and how it actually played out directly. This makes it feel like it's in line with, what we've seen before. So they did a good job at least at, sort of framing this in order to sort of lead us into this sort of backstory here.
Mm-hmm. So the setup for the backstory then is that I was traveling alone for the first time, free from Republic City and all the expectations of being the Avatar's kid. I'd just fallen in love for the first time, got dumped for the first time, and was feeling like I had no idea who I was meant to be or what I was supposed to do. Tenzin was busy mastering his bending with Aang. Bumi was already having adventures in the United Forces. I wanted to experience all that for myself, somewhere far away from my old life. The Siwang Desert was as far away from everything as possible, as we see her on like a train ride out to this sort of like Earth Kingdom outpost on the outskirts of the Siwang Desert, as she meets, I think it's Commander Ghi here, and we'll meet a bunch of other characters as we go through this. But just the setup here is quite interesting, because some of the stuff we did know about Kaya is that she had, there's some sense of, like, especially when we meet her in Korra Book 2, issues relating to, oh, Aang took you on all these kind of trips, he didn't take us on all these trips. And here the framing is kind of like a little bit kind of, better. There's no massive kind of resentment. It's just she wants to kind of find herself by going out on her own. Her brothers are already kind of doing their thing. Now she's trying to find out kind of what her thing is meant to be. They're quite careful with the continuity here, because she only tells Korra that she's gay in Turf Wars, but she doesn't specify who she fell in love with here. So it's more so like the audience can figure it out and that sort of thing. So this is that kind of first girlfriend, I guess, she talked about, just kind of before that gets fully revealed here, because this is going back in time. So yeah, this is kind of a pretty nice setup for Kaya ultimately. What are your thoughts on her kind of thought process heading out here to the desert?
Yeah, I mean, this feels like sort of like a typical thing that someone would do after falling out in love, just sort of going out and sort of figuring out what you want to do in your life, separating yourself and sort of going as far as you can to sort of, make yourself seem as least noticed. But even here, she already has the idea of her being sort of, related to the Avatar and stuff like that. So, that's just sort of something that she's going to have to figure out and always comes with her wherever she goes here. But no, this feels like, she's talked about adventures and things that she's done before in the past. And this feels like it's perfectly in line with that.
Yeah, it's that idea of, like, even though she's kind of more water tribe, being a waterbender, she is kind of nomadic in a way, as we kind of find out. So this is kind of like one of her first excursions, as we'll find out. And she'll basically kind of be a bit of a traveling healer for like a lot of her life, is sort of the idea, which is kind of cool. But the idea here is, why is she going out here to like Earth Kingdom kind of military outpost? Well, it's because she kind of has agreed to be part of this kind of thing that they're setting up so that they can get a trained healer in to assist these remote villages in the Siwang Desert with just having these kind of skills to help with illnesses and stuff like that. Again, this book will use the term healer more in the kind of like magic kind of doesn't exist type thing. Like, you can be a healer, but you can also be a waterbending healer. Kaya has the both skill set. She can be non-bender healer, but she can also do waterbending healing. She's not teaching the Siwang Desert people waterbending healing is sort of the idea here. Because I think there's a line coming up when she talks about her grandmother where people got kind of confused, but we'll get there. But yeah, immediately the commander here introduces her to this new character, this girl called Setseg, Tsettseg, and she is going to help to transport Kaya to the village of Liwan in the Siwang Desert. And we immediately get this vibe from this Earth Kingdom kind of commander here, the idea that like, oh, you can trust her. She's one of the trusted people of the Siwang Desert, not like those other Siwang Desert people. And we're immediately highlighting this kind of like difference among the people of the Siwang Desert. Yes, some of them are like kind of bandits, I guess a little bit like Dao Fei, but there are kind of just normal kind of groups of people out there as well. But the idea here is, why is Setseg from one of the Siwang clans? Why is she assisting the military herself? And he immediately mentions the idea of these rations. That basically is what she's being paid for to help with this. And yeah, they head off on a sand sailor, and it's revealed that Setseg is an earthbender and can do sand bending here. And we'll get the details on that in a second. But yeah, what are your thoughts here on kind of Kaya's mission and the introduction of Setseg?
Yeah, I don't know, this was interesting, and this is throughout the whole book, just sort of the idea of Setseg and just sort of sandbenders in general, and how they're sort of treated by sort of, I guess you could say more established earthbenders, or earthbenders that are, from the capital and the kingdom and stuff like that. So it was interesting to see that, and more, I mean, even in the series you get the whole idea, but in the series they definitely make the sandbenders out to be more of the bad guys. But here, you get to see that they're, just like any other people from any other sort of, village, especially the ones that are more sort of remote, or sort of have a style of bending that is different than what, is assumed to be the normal one here. They sort of get lumped together with this sort of, idea that they're sort of below, or sort of lower class, lower caste, and other things here. And I think even here, Kaya seems sort of like, notices this and seems a bit put out here. But no, I think it definitely does, set the stage of how the sandbenders are going to be filled, or going to be sort of, reflected on throughout the whole story here, which is just something of note, just to see that right here in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, they get to talking, and Setseg reveals that the reason she's working for the kind of Earth Kingdom military here is because they've recruited me since the groundwater dried up in the northern plains, and so this is their only real way to kind of get water. It's water rations. That's what this is all about, in exchange for helping them with her kind of earth bending, sand bending, to kind of get easily across the desert. So she then asks Kaya the question, what is a waterbender doing in a desert? And so she explains the whole healer thing. She kind of signed up as a volunteer to help these remote villages. And also she does mention her mother here, Katara. She did some traveling in the Siwang when she was young. It was a tough experience for her. She got a whole earful about it when she told her about this, but that she is here now. But she does note that the desert is beautiful, and Setseg agrees. So at this point, they then arrive at Liwan, this village here in the desert, and we'll get there in just a second. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this first back and forth between our characters here?
Yeah, I like this conversation. I think this was, a nice way to sort of set the stage between the two of them, and sort of their ideas of the desert, and how, even if it's barren, there's still beauty in it, and there's, interest in being there, which is, something that I guess you wouldn't typically think of a desert. But, this whole idea of just sort of, the desert and what it can mean, and sort of what, happens in the desert, and just sort of the people that are there. So no, I think this was, another way of just sort of expressing this, and just seeing how, I guess, sort of thoughtful Kaya is in general. And despite, sort of maybe going, against her mom's wishes, considering that her experience in the desert, wasn't necessarily the best one ever. If anyone remembers the show, but it's something to see, just sort of them returning to this location that we have experienced before.
So yeah, we arrive at Liwan here, and we meet Bai Yin, the local militia leader here. And so we're introduced to Bai Yin. She actually immediately dismisses Setseg, highlighting that, okay, she's part of the Earth Kingdom kind of military style thing, more on that side of things. And she also says some stuff, kind of implying stuff about the trustworthy kind of sandbenders. It's an interesting one here because they kind of highlight that this Liwan is more of a it's like an Earth Kingdom town in the Siwang Desert rather than maybe like being a full-on Siwang clan. And there's that kind of aspect going on here because that kind of is like a little bit of a kind of theme of the book and kind of what's happening here. It's the Earth Kingdom almost trying to like claim the Siwang tribes for themselves by like controlling them, and that's kind of what's going on here because you can tell that there's a mix of like, oh, some of these people are just more Earth Kingdom, and then some of them are no, like my grandmother is from the clans and she knows the stuff about the desert, and it's kind of interesting kind of what's going on here. One interesting point gets brought up here, which is that she apparently Bai Yin has been trying to teach the sandbenders normal earthbending. But Kaya notes like, hey, wouldn't sandbending be better out here? Like, shouldn't you learn from them? But she goes like, hey, no, Earth Kingdom, solid earthbending is the best type stuff, and we kind of just move on from here. And she's introduced to her room here and sort of just kind of left to do it. There's an interesting moment here where she takes out the portrait of her family and puts it down, but then puts it away with the idea, I think, here being that it's like, no, I'm here on my own. It's a notable thing that I've brought the family portrait with me, but I don't need it out right now. I'm here just as myself. That's sort of the idea. So it's nothing super serious, but it's a nice little moment there. It's interesting to see it in color here because officially it's only been uncolored. So I'm wondering, is this one of these situations where like the fan coloring has sort of inadvertently become canon? I think that might have been what ended up happening here. But what are your thoughts on these next group of pages?
Yeah, the introduction to Bai Yin, I think it's another one of those things where they're like sort of looking down, but they see the usefulness of the sandbenders. But again, they're better because of, whatever other reasons and their military power and just sort of their techniques, which is, I guess it's, good foreshadowing for what happens by the end of the comic and everything like that. But it definitely shows you sort of their idea of the hierarchy of this, sort of like lower level sort of outpost, because it's not a real outpost because that's the one that they sort of came from, but it's just sort of an off the beat town that isn't necessarily part of the Siwang tribes because they're sort of trying to make it Earth Kingdom. So I don't know, it's almost like they're trying to like reclaim their desert out here with their own sort of mini towns here, but they're still relying on sort of the primary sort of like support of the Earth Kingdom and stuff like that. So it's definitely an interesting setup that they have here, and I guess the idea of it is helpful because they are trying to sort of help the people out here, but we can see how sort of mixed results that actually gets here. But no, I think it's definitely something for Kai to just sort of interact with these people just a little bit more here to get an idea of what she's actually going to be doing in the future.
Mm-hmm. She then is introduced to her class to actually do the healing teaching. And yeah, she talks about how there's a tradition in the water tribe of using water to heal, but plants and minerals can also kind of help to cure diseases, heal wounds. She talks about how she doesn't really know the plants of the Siwang Desert, and someone in the class puts up their hand. His name is Anwat, and says that, hey, my grandmother showed me some plants that she used for healing. And she's like, hey, yeah, share what they are. But he's a little bit hesitant because, well, they told us to not do this stuff and to more learn to heal in like the proper Bossing Say way and not kind of do our own kind of like cultural way. And Kaya's just like, no, tell me, because like I don't know how they do it in Bossing Say either. So we'll kind of learn together. And so yeah, she teaches them the basics of like kind of bandages here, kind of using the kind of mortar and pestle to kind of grind up kind of ingredients. Also, they have the kind of dummy there with, I guess, the a newer example of chi paths on a body, which is kind of an interesting technical detail as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun. And then, yeah, they just kind of highlight that a bunch of time passes. It seemed to go really, really well. And then Bai Yin afterwards invites Kaya over for dinner to kind of talk to her. But what are your thoughts on this scene here with the kind of healing class? Once again, getting across that idea of like, do things our way, not the cultural Siwang Desert Clan way.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it has that sort of, back and forth there, which I don't know. It's odd to me that they would sort of like hire or, take, the volunteers, you know, in terms of Kaya, in terms of, helping her sort of teach them the sort of like proper way. But I don't know, maybe that's because, she's the Avatar's kid and so she has that sort of pedigree there, or just because they just, this was someone who volunteered and, they're taking free people. So this is what they're sort of getting here. But no, it looks like she's very sort of involved with the class and definitely, her background and sort of, knowledge of medicine and stuff like that. Like, it feels sort of on point that she wouldn't disregard anything that's sort of, relevant to the era that they're in, especially considering, how that plays out later on. So no, I think this was a good, sort of quick pages just to show her sort of getting into the flow of teaching and sort of enjoying it for the week that they're here.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they go back to Bai Yin's house. Her father is there. We see that he has kind of burn marks on his arms. And he quickly kind of leaves them alone for the most part. But they get to talking about this, and that, like, she says, my father was born under Fire Nation occupation. He doesn't even remember how he was injured, but the scars have left him in fragile health ever since. My father's story is Li Wan's story. The Fire Nation occupied our town till the final days of the 100-Year War. They called us a colony. My father's generation all bear scars from that time. They were born into powerlessness, weakness, now it is up to me and my generation to strengthen us again. And that's why we see Bai Yin is so set on kind of doing what she wants to do. It's this really interesting sense of like, they're survivors in a way of the war. And it's that heartiness of the Earth Kingdom that got them through the war. And that's why they're so kind of like, do it the Earth Kingdom way. A little bit like the general in the recent Suki comics as well. Like that, there's just that idea of really leaning into kind of classical Earthbender is strong type stuff. And we won't be brought down by drought. We've survived everything, and that's what this character is all about. And it's interesting because you're like, ooh, like I understand a little bit, but they actually have a nice arc for this character across the book. So it's cool kind of what they do with her. But what are your thoughts on this conversation?
Yeah, no, she definitely comes off very strong in this, which, you can understand after being in such a sort of like occupational, sort of takeover point for a period of time and just seeing how it's affected her family and just the people sort of around her. It's definitely something that really speaks to just sort of whole situation of things here. So no, I think this was, it's a good moment of sort of setting the stage for this character who, has come off, seeming pretty harsh, but, they're trying to show that it's not harsh without reason. So I think they're doing a good job of sort of trying to establish that, at least in the beginning here.
Mm-hmm. We jump to like the next day. The next class is then interrupted because raiders are attacking the east fields. And so what we end up seeing here is a fight between like actual like kind of people from the clans. The Sandbenders have come in, very much kind of coming across like the Sandbenders we saw in ATLA here. And so you get that contrast of sort of the kind of the sand colors versus the green of like the Earth Kingdom people defending. Kaya jumps out to fight as well, but she sees someone's injured, so she goes to kind of be kind of like battle medic on the battlefield here, while the fight is going on again. Earthbending versus sandbending, and of course the sandbenders, I guess, are at a slight advantage here given the environment. Kaya goes to help someone else with healing, but she takes kind of like a rock across the hip and she kind of gets a cut. And so she kind of goes down and Bai Yin has to kind of step in to defend her. What the raiders are here for is they are here to steal the water. So they're stealing the water from Li Wan, who already have like rationed water from like the Earth Kingdom. So you can sort of see that this is kind of what it's all about, being very protective over the water. They end up getting away on the Sand Sailor with the water, and of course Bai Yin has an absolute kind of meltdown here because this is the lifeblood of the being in the desert. They need that water. But she's also criticizing everyone quite harshly, like her defense force that's not even like super kind of elite or anything like that. What happened there? What was that display? I spent months training you sandbenders basically to earthbend properly like soldiers, even though they're not soldiers. We need to kind of win. That's sort of the idea. Setseg goes to basically leave, and this kind of calms Bai Yin down a little bit, but she's very much like, we need to get the water back. We need more benders. And she basically asks Setseg, do you know where we can find more benders? Effectively more sand benders is what it ends up kind of coming to. So that's what they're going to do next. They're going to go and find more sand benders, so to kind of increase their defenses effectively. And that's just the kind of idea. Kaya does bring up the obvious point of like, can we not just get more water from the outpost and bring it back? And we get highlighted the idea there's never enough water. This is why I guess those bandits from other clans are stealing the water here. They need it as well. No one has enough water. That's the whole idea here. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this action sequence that we get here?
So this was really cool. I think this was part of the preview, so it was cool to finally get the full context of it here. So I thought this was interesting. It definitely gets the perspective of how sort of the contrasting of the fights and sort of the bending styles here. And it seems like both are kind of like pretty effective here. So I don't know, maybe it's a little bit sort of, harsh for Bai Yin to get sort of so upset here, but you can see sort of the importance of the water here and how much it means to this outpost and how it just means to people in the desert in general. So maybe the harshness is sort of, valid to some degree here, but it definitely seems like she almost pushes Setseg over sort of the limit here. But she does, like you said, she does seem to calm down. And I don't know, it's interesting that they really are just sort of focused on getting more benders in order to sort of amp up their power, which, I mean, I guess, that seems to be just the thing in general here. It's basically just sort of like an arms race of people in order to sort of combat the sort of situation at hand. So I don't know, it almost feels like sort of the idea of the war hasn't really sort of ended in that regard, because there's still a lot of, fighting. Now it's just more sort of like infighting, you could say, per se here. But yeah, definitely does make the situation much more serious here, and Kaya's definitely sort of feeling it at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm. So we head out on the Sand Sailor here, and we address the whole idea of when did the groundwater dry up, what could have caused it. It was already depleted by the time I was born. My grandparents remember a time when it would refill every year, but that was when they were young. And so just the timeline is kind of interesting in all of this, because like we're going back into the 100-Year War, but we're also like a little bit kind of into kind of the adult Aang era here. So it's interesting, the kind of timing here. And yeah, the whole idea is that like they're addressing this whole idea of their history, the freedom of the Siwang kind of clans, and they're all kind of like, it's all about water here. That's what they need to survive. Everyone needs it. And interestingly, we do begin to highlight here that Kaya is now beginning to struggle for what reason? Like waterbender in the desert, absence of water. But as we'll see, more the context of what they're about to do here is this thing that begins to have kind of an impact on her energy in terms of just what they're doing. And I'll address this kind of later on. So we get to this kind of clan, and so it's Setseg's clan. She meets her kind of auntie here, and she introduces Bai Yin here. And the idea is like, basically, give me all your sandbenders. We don't have any. And Bai Yin gets quite angry here because, hey, don't lie to me. You have a sand sailor, so you have a sandbender. And so the sandbender then ends up coming out, and it's this kind of kid, just like he looks about like 12 maybe. He comes out, and Kaya continues to be really struggling as she watches this happen, and she's kind of part of kind of what's happening here. And the idea here is, I will go with you if you will truly deliver water to the clan. You have a deal. You'll receive your clan's ration after 1 month's service. And the idea is that Kaya watches on as kind of they kind of take this sandbender away from his home, to protect his people here with the water. And the idea is like, will she be okay? Eventually. And so, yeah, Setseg is in a kind of bad way after this as well. She's kind of struggling. Are you okay? I don't ask that question anymore. So this has happened a lot in the desert. This is basically what's happened to all the sandbenders who've been recruited. It's this deal that they kind of can't really refuse, is sort of the idea. So they make camp for the night after this, because they're out fairly late at this point. We'll come back to the full context for this scene kind of later on, but it's interesting kind of what we're doing here, in that like Kaya thinks she's on the good side of this, but actually like this is kind of questionable what's happening here. But what are your thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, no, it definitely feels questionable, and what they're sort of doing here is sort of, force, enrollment into, the militaries or this militia sort of service here, right? And especially taking someone so young, it definitely, for someone like Kaya, who's probably heard a lot of this sort of experience from like, her parents and her, everything that's happened in the past here, you can pretty easily see the sort of similarities here, even if it is for one nation supporting its own nation. It still, comes across very sort of harsh here. And I think, they get that across pretty well here, how off-putting this is to Kaya, without her even sort of really knowing exactly what's the issue right now, but you can tell that there's something going on.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, they make camp in this kind of rocky kind of outcropping. They kind of find a nice cave. Kaya once again is struggling. She thinks it's just her being nauseous from the heat, but then they are attacked by an animal. This is a rattle jackal that attacks them. He ends up the rattle jackal ends up biting the new sandbender that they've just recruited. Setseg kind of like fights it off, and they kind of get out. Kaya rushes to heal the boy, but she notes that, hey, I need to extract the venom, but she's struggling. Her bending isn't really working properly. It's all wobbly. She can't really focus, and it just fails. She kind of temporarily kind of loses the ability to bend here, and so she kind of calls out, we need something to extract the venom fast. And this is where we have to go back to Siwang clan, kind of the way they do it, because this is an animal in their region, so this would happen before, they would know what to do. My grandmother uses murray bean leaves on rattle jackal bites, and so they're going to go find them. And so Anwat, I think it is, brings them back, and so they heal it in the kind of traditional way, an emergency solved that way, not with the modern kind of Earth Kingdom way. And yeah, Kaya just kind of bandages up the arm, and he's going to be okay. He has a fever, but it has broken. And so they do address what happened to your healing back there, and she talks about how she feels drained. I can feel there's something blocking my energy, but I don't know what. And Bai-Yin is just kind of like, well, you better figure this out soon here, and we're just going to drop everyone back at the outpost. And this is interesting, because we begin to get into this idea, like we've seen this kind of a few times. This is like Zuko in the Earth King. This is Lin in Old Wounds. It's your emotions affecting you so much that like it makes you sick. It makes your chi disrupted. It affects your bending. And that's kind of what's happening to Kaya here. And we'll get to the kind of answers shortly. But what are your thoughts on the rattle jackal attack here?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's cool, just the animal stuff. I mean, any sort of hybrid animal is always interesting to see here. But no, I think it's, considering they talked about sort of, natural remedies and, being local to the area that they're in, it makes sense that would potentially be, the way to sort of deal with the situation here. And especially with Kaya's bending being on the fritz right now, you can see sort of the benefit of having that. And, Kaya's not opposed to any sort of natural remedy at all. So I like that they're sort of including that right here in the beginning. So it just sort of, sets the stage of, maybe there's other ways, potentially better ways of sort of doing the healing here. But yeah, it is, unfortunate to see Kaya struggle with her bending and her sort of techniques here. And I don't know, it's interesting because like she's not even sort of teaching her sort of bending ways here, so she's still useful even if she, isn't sort of the super waterbender in a desert, which is already sort of at a disadvantage at this moment in time here. But you can just tell that she's just off enough that she just by default doesn't feel well. And this is not surprising considering if there's something such at odds with the way that you feel about yourself in the world, that it would sort of basically making yourself sick.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, she talks to Setseg about this. I don't know what's wrong with me. Ever since we picked Dorsey up, I've been feeling sick to my stomach. Seeing his elder try to hide him, it made me feel like we were doing something wrong. And Setseg highlights that, yeah, I was like him just once. My family did not want me to work for the Earth Kingdom either, but our oases were dry and we do what we must in desperate times. And Dorsey's elder knows this too. We've lived through hard times before. We'll live through this one too. And so the idea is like, what do you mean by that? So we're talking about kind of like the history of the clan. They've been through stuff before, not just the current kind of drought, lack of water. And so, yeah, here, let me show you something. And so they take the sand sailor out deeper into the desert. And we get the kind of reveal of what the cover of the book was about. I think everyone had gone with the idea that, oh, surely this is just the skeleton of one of those kind of sand creatures that we see before. A sand shark, I think it is, in like Korra and stuff like that. But no, this is a whale. And we get this really interesting kind of lore reveal. This is a sacred place for my clan. Ages ago, the desert was an ocean. Our legends say that we used to sail on water, not on sand. That is why sand bending is closer to water bending than earth bending. But the world changed, the sea dried up, the whales and fish left only their bones, but the Sea Wong tribes remained. This is the way of things for us. We know our lives may always be changed slowly or all at once. Sometimes it feels impossible to survive, but we do. We must survive. Our history is written all over this desert, and if it becomes a sea again someday, we will still be sailing. Bai Yin and the Earth Kingdom thinks that strength comes from immovability. They think that's what a mountain is, but we know that the strength also comes from the ability to adapt, to become something new while remaining yourself. It's not easy to do. And then we'll get into what Kaya says in a minute. But yeah, this is an interesting reveal here. I don't think we ever had any indication of something like this before, that the Sea Wong Desert used to be an ocean, and how far back are we kind of going here, that sort of thing. How big of an ocean are we talking? There's a few things here where like this would have been nice to get maybe a little bit of a flashback back to the ancient kind of Sea Wong tribes or something like that, just to highlight what it is. It just feels like a kind of broad world building reveal without maybe going super in depth, though I think it is still quite interesting. But yeah, this is kind of cool. It's basically addressing the idea that the Sea Wong clans are kind of similar to the water tribes in that they deal with change a lot, because that's one of the words typically associated with the water tribes, is that they deal with change in terms of like water, ice, that sort of thing, swapping it back and forth, swapping defense into offense and stuff like that. And yeah, in so many different ways, yeah, the sandbenders are kind of similar to the water tribes like that. And that's the point they're trying to make here, just more in terms of like, oh, we sailed on the waters in the past. I'm not fully sure on the whole, this is why sandbending is closer to waterbending than earthbending, and like what that necessarily like means as such. Because it's like, okay, they're earthbenders, but they're in a watery environment. Something about that line doesn't fully, I don't follow it through the whole way. Like I sort of get what they're going for here, but it's like practically what does that mean? I'm not fully sure. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this kind of big kind of center point of the book?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a nice comparison point just for Kaya and just sort of her understanding the culture and the history, and it gives her a little bit more relatability of the people there in the desert and stuff like that. So I like the idea that there's something some commonality there. So that's, it's a nice sort of, a little bit of a pick me up here. In terms of, how it works in the world and everything like that. Like, I mean, it seems plausible. I mean, I think it would be that sort of change, at least considering, how technically the real world would work, that would be very, very long periods of time ago for such a long change to sort of actually happen there. So, but it's not immediately implausible. And, of course, this is a fictional world. So, who knows how everything actually works here. So, I like the idea behind it. And, it would be interesting if there was some sort of commonality there between sort of their tribes, that far back where there was some sort of bleed over there. But no, I think it's a nice, touching moment here of a history that, maybe was, many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, because in my head, I'm kind of trying to think about like were they always like Earth tribe, or are we trying to say that like in the past, the people that lived in this region were actually waterbenders, but as time went on, more and more earthbenders got kind of incorporated in, and so you get that idea of like ancient Siwang tribes people were actually waterbenders, and that's how you have now earthbenders who do kind of waterbending movements kind of as that kind of transition happened. But I don't know, they don't go into enough detail really. But Kaya then says kind of her piece here. It's not easy to do. I always thought I could rely on my bending, I'm sure it'll return is what Setseg says. I don't know. I've never felt disconnected from it before. I spent the last few months in so much turmoil, feeling like nobody recognizes me anymore. And maybe I don't either. But healing was something I could still do, something that my mother and grandmother did. It kept me connected to them. The Fire Nation nearly destroyed that. My mother was the only waterbender they couldn't take away. How could I lose what she fought so hard to keep? And Setseg is like, the Fire Nation took away your waterbenders? Perhaps something we did today reminded your spirit of that. We should be sure to bring Dorsey back to his clan tomorrow. Yes, we will, but for now, you're bending. And we get to, like, how do we kind of fix this problem for Kaya? And it's about kind of connecting. Setseg talks about how she connects with her bending. Sometimes when I'm bending, I feel the sand moving with my heartbeat. Can you feel it? Your energy moving with your pulse? Yes. They hold hands. They kind of have that kind of energy connection. I can feel it too. You're blocked, but not forever. And then together, sensing things, they do feel something. I felt something, like the bedrock was breathing beneath us. It was water. So a mix of like water and then how the water is affecting the kind of earth and sand. And it's a cool little kind of double kind of bending connection moment that they have here. But probably one of the more notable visual moments of the book happens in this sequence. Everyone was posting this the day the book came out. Little Kaya and older than the movie Katara, waterbending together. Very, very cool moment here. Kind of feels a little bit like the Mako comic where we did get that kind of one shot of kind of the mother towards the end, and here's your one kind of moment flashing back to Katara. It's a very, very nice kind of moment here in that, like, yeah, it's this point of connection of like what we did felt like what happened to my tribe. Another group of people coming in to take people away because of their bending abilities. Like, the context is slightly different, but like she felt wrong taking people away from their homes, which is what her family has dealt with. And that's the kind of point here. That's where this kind of block came from. And this connection is kind of what fixes it, as we'll see here in a minute. But what were your thoughts on this moment here for Kaya?
Yeah, no, I think, it comes across pretty clearly that this was something that was, very intrinsic to sort of her family and her sort of upbringing. And even if she didn't initially sort of recognize it, she can, sort of realize it here. And especially Sizig sort of, can see the similarities there and how that definitely would sort of upset her spirit, essentially, right? Like, especially since, like she's saying here, the healing connected her to her whole family, like even if it's waterbending or just, generally healing, that, everyone sort of has learned in her tribe and stuff like that. Her not being able to connect to it in sort of like a deeper level, which is what they sort of, connect to right here in the moment here. just sort of feeling how that really, relates to sort of your heart and your spirit overall.
So what they sense in the ground, they kind of move over towards it, and together they bend. So sand bending plus water bending. Water comes up out of the ground, and they had to do it kind of so powerfully here. They see that what's left behind is that they've kind of brought a pipe up, a water pipe up out of the ground. And when they look a little bit closer, it has a Fire Nation symbol on it. And so the idea here is that the groundwater didn't dry up, the Fire Nation diverted it. But where? And so, okay, we're going to follow the pipe to one of the ends and we'll kind of figure this out, basically. That's the kind of whole idea. And so, yeah, they head back to kind of Bai Yin and everyone and stuff like that. And they kind of tell her what happened. You're saying there's been groundwater here this whole time. Yes. When the Fire Nation invaded this region, they must have built the pipes to divert water to their outposts. And yes, this is the timeline that makes sense. But Bai Yin says, no, after Ozai was defeated, the Earth King repaired everything that had been destroyed. Why wouldn't they have restored the groundwater? I don't know. Let's follow the pipe to its end. And so that's what we're going to do. They send Dorsey back to Li Wan, even though he's kind of injured, but they still, I suppose, have need of him for now. They head back to the end of the pipe. And the end of the pipe is the Earth Kingdom outpost that they just came from. So the one that's under Commander G's kind of control. And so, okay, we've got a bit of a kind of a issue here overall, where even before they fully reveal the whole situation here, the idea is that, okay, the Earth Kingdom were given control of the pipe, but they never got rid of the pipe. They still wanted to kind of use that themselves because of this whole, we want to have control over the people of the Siwang Desert kind of aspect that we have going on here, which is an interesting kind of just view into sort of some of these post-war politics that are going on, in terms of like, it would have been interesting if they did flash back to some of these like meetings or agreements where like Quay and Zuko would have been involved, but the idea here more so seems to be just people making decisions kind of on their own, ignoring the core intent, I guess, from the world leaders and not really thinking about the small people. But it's an interesting kind of reveal here. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this? The secret of the pipe. This is the title, I guess, revealed here.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely something just to see sort of, what happened during the war and just sort of, people sort of reacting to it now. Because, I mean, it's, they're not aware of this sort of situation here, but clearly there's people, up in higher places that are sort of aware of, sort of the intricacies of what the Fire Nation did. And they really did, try to basically take over everything and try to, in their view, sort of modernize, everything else in the world to bring them up to their own level here. And, sometimes you would think that would mean sort of like reverting things back to the way they were. But, sometimes places they like using that current infrastructure. It's just sort of how well it's actually used towards the people and sort of the corrupt people along the way that sort of take advantage of the situation here. But, our group here, they definitely are not sort of on board with that, considering they know how much, people sort of struggle in the situation. So they really, feel sort of the pain that this is actually causing that, maybe the other people don't necessarily know or just don't care what's sort of going on.
Mm-hmm. So they get back to the outpost. Bai Yin gets a bit upset at the kind of implication here that like the Earth Kingdom might be to blame for this, but she's following her waterbending to the right spot. They call Commander G out to talk about this. He does come out, and he tries to kind of deflect, but Kaya just gets annoyed and is just like, hey, no, I'm going to waterbend the pipe here. So yeah, the water comes gushing out, so much water, and Bai Yin especially is absolutely kind of stunned by this, because this completely like shatters her worldview of the kind of current situation here. Like, she had defended like his command effectively in terms of what they're doing out here. She's put so much into this, but they were restricting it. Like, they had all these rations when they kind of didn't necessarily kind of like need to. Like, the whole point of the whole ration thing, it's because of them. They could have taken that down kind of whenever they really needed to. And he just is like, hey, yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, you're ignorant of our own infrastructure. Fire Lord Zuko kindly turned over operation of the pipes to the Earth Kingdom upon his ascension to the throne. We all benefit from the streamlining of our irrigation system. Why didn't we know about this? Why would you need to know about the details of the Earth King's agricultural planning? And she just really highlights, we need this water. No, you need to get back to Liwan, return to your duties there. And so she just gets really, really annoyed and attacks Ji and his guards. So she really comes at him like aggressively here with her earthbending, and she just full on like breaks the pipe. She does crazy earthbending, brings the pipe up, kind of breaks it in a few different spots. The fight kind of continues. Kaya gets involved, Setseg gets involved, and they really quickly take this guy out because he's not like that powerful and he's hugely outnumbered. And it's the idea for Bai-Yin. You knew we were suffering. You knew we needed that water. The Earth Kingdom was supposed to care about us. Interestingly, Setseg steps up and says, leave them. They aren't the ones responsible for this. And yeah, they're just patsies. Let's go. So someone higher up than him has made this decision, but it doesn't seem like this was the intent of like Zuko or even King Kwai to do this. It's the idea that this is some, I guess, ministers somewhere up the chain that made this decision for the betterment of the Earth Kingdom, and that's the problem in all of this. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this? Bai-Yin kind of dealing with this kind of betrayal from her commander.
Yeah. I mean, you might say it seems like it's a bit extreme, but she's been pretty extreme this whole time. This is just sort of extreme on the other end. So, she's, despite, the harshness that it seems that she has, she's really, she really feels for the people that she's been, sort of told to sort of take care of. And, considering how, how hurt her family has been, via the Fire Nation and everything, it's almost like she doesn't want to use anything from them, even if it is something that might benefit them a little bit. So yeah, she definitely sort of, jumps into the fray here and just basically tries to destroy it, like you say here. And she's really having sort of like, a beginning of her sort of crisis moment with everything that she thought, the Earth Kingdom was supposed to sort of do is not necessarily what she thought here. So I think it definitely just shows you just sort of how, corrupt things can get over time, even if they were done sort of with better intentions, sort of potentially initially.
Mm-hmm. So after dealing with this, they're like, okay, we'll follow the pipe in the opposite direction. This is where the water's going to. Where's the water being taken from? And we can kind of stop the pipe kind of directing the water and restore this back to the desert. We get Bai-Yin apologizing to Setseg on behalf of the Earth Kingdom. I don't know why they've done this, if the king has any idea. I didn't. I just don't want you to think this is all the Earth Kingdom is. But she says, stop. You have to understand, stealing people's land, their water, their families, that's all any kingdom is. But you are not your kingdom unless you choose to be. I hope now you won't. And so they make it there. They're going to sense where it is together. Now the three of them kind of working in tandem here. And yeah, they kind of find this kind of cliff kind of area here, and yeah, they kind of crack it open. Kaya pulls the water out, and they make a little bit of a kind of waterfall type thing that, yeah, the water's going to come back in here to kind of fill this basin or whatever, and in time, things will kind of go back to the way they kind of used to be. And so for the most part, it seems like the water maybe crisis will potentially end in the Siwang Desert here, and they've kind of resolved it here. So it's a cool moment here. I do like the moment of like getting all three of our kind of like main characters in the book kind of working together to fix this problem in the end, and the whole idea of like, yeah, you don't need to be excessively loyal to the Earth Kingdom. It's more about like individually making the right kind of choices overall, which is kind of interesting for both characters. But what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think especially, this far out and being in such a remote, location, it almost seems kind of, funny and odd to be, so sort of loyal to sort of the kingdom that maybe doesn't necessarily have your best interests out here in sort of where you're located. But yeah, I think it's a really nice moment of having them all, sort of working together, how they can sort of bend the mountain together, which was sort of, the idea that they sort of started this whole thing with, but now they're sort of using it in this sort of more positive and sort of helpful way of being able to connect to towards the sort of nature and sort of understanding what's going on here. So no, I think this was definitely a nice little bit here to sort of conclude this, to show that they're going to have another source of water in the area, and maybe there won't be as much sort of infighting in this remote location.
Then we do some kind of quick montages here as we see the Sandbender is brought back to his town, so that they've kind of solved that problem. We see Bai-Yin is learning sandbending from, I think it's Onwat here, so having to learn the more loose movements of sandbending here. She's going to live in a sand kind of more focused environment, and she's going to adapt to that. And then we see Kaya just about to get on the train to go home. Thank you for everything, Setseg. It was good to know you, Kaya. I hope you'll visit again the Siwang again someday. Of course I will. And they say goodbye to each other here. Kaya seems to have some sort of a like Siwang desert kind of scarf type thing as a kind of memento from her time here in the desert, which is kind of nice. And yeah, she heads off on the train, and we come out of the flashback at this point. And the idea is an interesting one here, is that she has this kind of connection to the desert now. They're not super clear on if, like, is this going to be a romantic relationship for Kaya potentially going to the future? There's a few elements of maybe teasing that, but they never fully kind of committed to it, I guess, because she's just coming off a breakup. But maybe this is another one of these relationships that happens for Kaya. But what were your thoughts here on the ending of the flashback?
No, I think this was nice. This was a good way to sort of conclude the show. Being was reconnecting, being more understanding of the new environment that you're in, and just sort of Kaya realizing that this was maybe a better trip than she might initially thought, and now she has a friend in another location that she can go visit. So no, I think there was a great quick sort of wrap up for it.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, we cut back out to Korra in the bed, listening to the story from Kaya here. As far as I know, Boston say, never even noticed a little less water coming their way. And Korra's like, hold on, you're telling me I just need to listen to my heartbeat and it'll all be better? No, definitely not. I'm telling you that even if things are different now, you're still you and you're still the Avatar. How can I be? Setseg showed me that no amount of upheaval can erase our connection to our heritage. You are still and always will be made from the collective wisdom of generations of waterbenders and ages of avatars. And I think I speak for all of them when I say you should get some rest now. Good night, Korra. And she heads off outside and she looks up at the kind of full moon as the kind of ending of all of this, because like there's the kind of source of water bending and stuff like that, and that's kind of what we do here. I think this is mostly fairly fine. I think there's maybe a slight struggle right at the end to fully connect the story that Kaya was telling to something that like Korra can take on to help her with her recovery. It just doesn't really feel like it maybe fully kind of connects as strongly. Like the core idea is there, but it feels like it kind of needed a little bit more kind of connection to kind of get that idea across. Especially kind of given what kind of ends up actually happening with Korra here. So it just is, to me, these pages feel like a little flat, like it didn't fully come together. The whole flashback section, the core of the book was still really, really good, but the impact on Korra maybe feels a little bit like these pages could have been maybe a little bit better done in my mind. It kind of has a little bit of a feeling like the previous book, where like it just ends. It's just like the book is now over. We've run out of time, and I would have liked a little bit more time to linger on the ending a bit more and hit a point home like a little bit stronger here. Where like it's just like, okay, Kaya looking up at the moon, it's a nice visual, but like, what was the moon like an important part of the story necessarily? I get the waterbending connection, but what are your thoughts on how they kind of wrap things up here with the ending of the Korra and Kaya scene?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I mean, I think, the idea of, being connected to your history and your past, I think it definitely, it comes across here. I don't know, Korra's always been sort of a more, I guess you could say, actionable person. So I could see how, for someone who has that sort of mindset and just, the general idea of what she's trying to do right now in terms of, being able to walk again and being able to feel, sort of like she's useful to the world. It doesn't quite have as much of a thing, as a impact there as it could potentially have. But I think, in terms of it showing, yeah, you have your history, you have your sort of legacy behind you that you're sort of trying to continue on and move forward with, and that will always hopefully potentially keep you going. I think they're trying to sort of show that here, and I think I guess Korra gets that to some degree here, although I think this is still it's one of those things that it's like it's earlier on in her sort of recovery here, so maybe it doesn't work as purposeful as it could potentially be when she's later on at another point, or maybe it would even work better if this was earlier on in her recovery when she was really, really at her sort of low point. So I don't know, maybe it's just sort of a timing thing where it could have been potentially more impactful.
Yeah, because I think that all the speculation that people had about this once we realized they were going to have like Korra recovering being the framing device was everyone I think came into the end expecting that like this advice from Kaya would maybe lead to Korra starting to write letters to like Asami basically. Now the problem there is like you can't overly connect the dots fully there because it's only in Turf Wars that Kaya reveals that she's gay, so it would have to have been more about this idea of connection and hitting that point home a little bit more, that like you just need to connect to the people who care about you. And it would have been, I think, just the point to really highlight that I suppose Kaya really accomplished something with Korra here with this story, that Korra actually is like, do you know what? Yeah, I will send that first letter to Asami. And that would have been a kind of a nice little thing to do. But yeah, it's still a pretty decent book. So the question then immediately kind of comes up of like, okay, what are they going to do for the third one in this trilogy? The only real connective tissue between them is just that like both books basically involve a flashback of sorts. It sort of involves like family to a certain degree, the brothers and their mother, Kaya kind of in a way escaping away from her family, but also still focusing on connection. So it could be really anyone, because they've done some of the main characters. They've gone for one of the kind of like older characters in a flashback scenario. Asami, I still think, remains the character that people want the book for the most, who probably like I think needs it the most. But there's lots of options depending on what they want to do. But yeah, an Asami book that can maybe give us a little bit more Yasuko and Hiroshi, I think that's kind of what I'd like to see. And then that would allow you to have some Korra as well. And in a similar situation to this book where you frame it as maybe Asami telling stuff about Korra, about her past. But what are your thoughts on book 3 for the one-shot, the Korra one-shots?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Asami would be a good one just because that's a character that we're always talking about, has less information on her in general or just sort of her backstory. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know, out of all the Korra characters, we could do one shots on that wouldn't affect things going on. I don't know. That's a hard one.
Yeah, it's tricky because they could do so many different characters. And then we also have the Avatar Legends novel series that can apparently use Korra as well, and they're effectively like almost like a giant one-shot kind of novel. So there's a lot of openings here. We'll just see how it goes. I really do hope, though, that they announce who the next one is, hopefully at New York Comic Con, and that the scheduling is a little bit better. Like, I really hope that the next book isn't like, if it takes as long as it did before, then like that'd be like 2028, which seems kind of crazy. But like they need to get that book out next year, I think, is realistically the idea, just to give people hope for things getting on track again. Because otherwise then it kind of gets into a situation where it's like, I think you might have to change up the creative team to make it work a little bit better, which they might have already done, but it's a little bit unclear. Like Brandon Huang is writing a Korra comic. It's just, we don't know what it is. Is he doing the third one or is he doing the fourth one? Because there is something to the whole has Kiku Hughes like left the project type thing, because we know that there was some issue with this comic in terms of what she originally wanted to do with the story and what she kind of had to maybe settle on as the story. So maybe she's not writing the third one when usually that would be the case, and maybe Brandon Wang is kind of more of a kind of fill-in for the third Korra one-shot. Or is he talking about, like, I've started work on the fourth one? We just don't know. But yeah, that's the situation with the comics. We're just kind of mostly waiting for other stuff to happen. Masters of the Elements Volume 1 is out next week. Though, again, the interesting point about that is that some of the hype is definitely undercut by the fact that more than half the book is not, like, new stuff. Still, there are some new stories in it. There is a Kyoshi story and there are 2 Yang Chen stories, and they will be the ones that we review at some point when we do the next podcast. So that will be exciting, but it also means that there's probably a lot more hype for probably Masters of the Elements Volume 2 when maybe they bring more avatars into play. Because it's cool that like Aang and Korra are part of this, but it does kind of feel like this should be focused on the other avatars. But yeah, from there, we will move into our further coverage of the Aang movie. Of course, last time on the podcast, we mostly just went back and forth with our initial thoughts very soon after kind of just like watching it. Here, we'll go through it a little bit more kind of scene by scene like we just did with the comic. The tentative idea here is to try and get through half, but I'll keep an eye on the time and see how we kind of go here on this one. Because yeah, we'll come back for other podcasts to fully cover everything. It's just, yeah, we need to get this covered before Seven Havens starts. It's kind of crazy that it's all hitting like that. But I suppose we'll start off with just the idea that like it's been about a month. Like in a few days, it will be exactly a month since the movie hit. How have your thoughts on the movie kind of developed since like the kind of initial reactions to it? I assume like you've seen it a few times at this point. Have things changed from those early days or not?
No, that's a good question, and I don't think overall I've changed that much on it. I definitely have seen, more topics and more ideas about the movie brought up, and more sort of, criticisms and more praise and stuff like that, and sort of how well it's supposedly doing on media right now, and sort of the potential release for the physical media and stuff like that. So it definitely feels like it's is coming more into its own in terms of its property, and sort of a lot of the initial noise has sort of died down. But I think, personally for me, I think I'm still pretty much on the same level. I don't, I'm not going to be sort of like, I don't think I'm like more enamored with the movie to the point where I really felt, like, again, it needed to be like in every place and everything and stuff like that. But I think it was still, a good movie. I enjoyed watching it. I was really fortunate enough to get to see it like in a theater and stuff like that. So that was, a little bit extra to get to see it that way as well. So, I appreciate that. And I don't know, I think it still, had some potential and some form of capacity more than what it was initially sort of released. But, I think the idea of the wider release is also something to maybe consider. Maybe that wasn't a thing for it, maybe, but it definitely seems to be doing well right now online. So there's definitely still the idea of that, and who knows what the future might lead for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fairly similar for me in that like I've gone through it a lot. I've done all my kind of videos analyzing it until like the art book and novelization come out, and despite that, every time I come back to it, I still watch it with like a smile on my face. I really love what they did with this movie, the main character arc, Taga as a kind of new character here, how amazing all the visuals are. So I'm still remain like really kind of high on this movie, and while I can see some of the complaints that people have, I'm just kind of like, I think they ended up in a pretty nice spot with this, that like the movie length was always going to be a challenge, but I think they focus this movie down to the right amount of stuff. It doesn't feel like there's a crazy amount of excessive stuff going on here where like, okay, there's not an arc for like the rest of Team Avatar, but that's fine. They're here to support Aang. We've seen this before in other media. Not all members of the team are active in their own character arc during every single plot. That's perfectly fine. The Denied is probably the thing aspect of the movie that needs like a little bit more development, but I think their main role and involvement in the movie, I think, is relatively clear, and it's just mostly, some extra detail would be appreciated. So I'm still quite high on the movie. I really, really do like it, and sort of kind of bristle, I think, a little bit every time I see some of the kind of criticisms sometimes online about this movie, that like this didn't feel like an important story to tell and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like, no, I can't agree with that. This definitely feels like they needed to tell it. So we'll jump in here, and I think straight away, I think from scene one, they hit the point that they're trying to do with Aang, the arc they're trying to do with Aang, immediately here, with the starting with the flashback to him before the ice, and among all the bisons, there's Monkey Atso, there's other airbenders, kind of teasing that sort of the storm dynamic of Aang and his interaction with the other airbenders of his age, and the idea that he's so much kind of better than them. He's a master, they're not masters yet, and Gyatso kind of like forcibly kind of holds him back, so he loses the race here. And it's the kind of reverse of that dynamic in the storm, where no one wanted to be play that game with him because he's the Avatar and our team's going to lose. And then of course for the older Aang, ending this little kind of flashback dream sequence with the harsh reality of this is not the case anymore. He doesn't have these people anymore, and this is the one thing kind of missing in a way in his life, is his people, airbenders. And I think straight away it's a fantastic way to kind of start the movie with the idea that this is always on Aang's mind. And this has been on his mind for all this time. And especially, I suppose, as we meet him in this movie, he's particularly been drawn out to the temples by himself, kind of lingering in this kind of part of these memories and the kind of guilt surrounding it. That like it's the loss of airbenders, the loss of his people, the fact that he wasn't there for his people kind of comes back again. And I think these are all aspects that are really interesting to explore with this character. But what are your thoughts on this opening it up with this kind of dream sequence to a younger Aang?
Yeah, I thought that was, it's definitely a good way, like you're saying there, to sort of set the stage of his current mindset, right? Like you have to establish why he's, doing everything that he's doing, and why he's sort of visiting this temple first thing in the beginning of the movie that, leads everything to follow afterwards here, and how, the whole idea of him going to this first place is this sort of him going back home. So the idea that you can sort of, see this place before it was burned up, gives you a good understanding of his, unfortunate headspace and sort of these dreams, these sort of nightmares that he's having, and how, that seems to have been sort of really weighing down on him. And, during the series, we saw that he got to a place where he sort of, was accepting a bit about this. But, of course, like many things, things just don't go away, and sometimes they reoccur and stuff like that. So even if he did think he was at sort of a better place with dealing with this stuff, clearly that's not the case here, and it's been building up over the past couple of years as he's been sort of going to these temples and finding artifacts and stuff like that, as we later on learn. So I think it definitely does sort of put you into the idea of where he is and how unfortunate he's feeling about sort of current situations, and maybe what he could have done in the past if he had thought differently.
Yeah, because the original series mostly kind of went with the idea that like his responsibility as the Avatar was the arc, basically, that he had to kind of deal with. And that was what he kind of accomplished at the end, was like he's not the Avatar who ran away anymore. He stepped up as the Avatar, but that doesn't deal with the not being there for his people kind of aspect of it. Like he's redeemed himself in the present, but that doesn't reflect on how he kind of feels about the past. And it's that angle on things that we're kind of trying to explore here. And so it's interesting because you also have stuff like, obviously in the background, as we find out from the end of the movie, the Air Temple Island is being built. I interpret it as they don't retcon the origin of the acolytes, and it's just an air acolytes, and it is just an addition. So technically, I guess the other air acolytes are out there. It's just that where he finds himself at this point in time, he's really missing the, in particular, loss of airbenders. The fact that, okay, there are people who are interested in the culture, but like we don't have our place yet because the Air Temple Island isn't built. None of them are airbenders either, and you know, him having to have this arc of realizing the importance more being on the kind of culture, the values, rather than just the power of airbending, which we'll kind of get into here. But yeah, as we continue on, yeah, you get that contrast as he arrives back at the Southern Air Temple and how empty it was compared to how amazing it was in the kind of dream sequence. He's found some relics on this journey and he's returning them here to his kind of collection in the kind of main tower of the Southern Air Temple. And he finds what seems to be his oldest relic yet. It says the name Sonam on it, and it's a very unique air nomad with different arrow tattoos on it, holding a pretty unique staff as well. And he puts that down. Then he goes over to another relic that's quite important to him, and that is Monk Gyatso's necklace, of course. And he lingers on this with the idea that he, of course, in particular misses Gyatso here. And this is when the attack comes in. So the cool kind of plot details here are kind of nice, as you kind of see that obviously over the years Aang has found a lot of Air Nomad relics, building it back up, and he's recently found this quite important Sonam one, which other people have also been looking for, which is I think a very fun detail here. But any thoughts on him kind of in the Southern Air Temple, his relic collection?
Yeah, him doing the hunting, and I don't know, I think it is a nice touch, and it feels like something that he probably would do, especially if it seems like at this moment in time he's at sort of like a low moment and trying to sort of hold on any little bit he can to his sort of culture and his heritage and stuff like that. So no, I think it kind of makes sense. I wonder, sort of how long he's been doing this sort of initial sort of like surge of refinding stuff, considering everything that's, happened to his life up until this point.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he is attacked by this group of non-benders. There are 4 of them that attack him here. These are all named characters here. So we have Jie, who is the leader of the Denied. She's a former Yu-Yan archer. We have Yoda, who is the big giant Earth Kingdom man who has this Guan Dao kind of weapon. Hong is the thief guy with fans. And Kalik is the young woman who has the rope dart. And as the fight kind of goes on, we get revealed that they are in fact this group called the Denied. And the idea is that they are non-benders who feel they have been denied bending and want to seek it out in some sort of a way, which is why they're here. And as the fight goes on, we find out that, they themselves are searching for the Sonam relic that Aang has just brought back. So they've kind of followed him here. And you kind of wonder, where did they get on the Sonam trail from? Which I'm guessing the novelization might end up revealing. The fighting is cool here because Aang is very representative of Air Nomad kind of ideals here. It seems like he could very easily defeat them, but he doesn't want to hurt them. So that's why the fight ends up being quite protracted and he's running away. He jumps into the rafters and they're just destroying all of these relics. And he's reacting to that, of course, because it's the remains of his culture and it's being destroyed here while he's trying not to hurt these people. And it's like they're not really giving him much of a choice here. What ends up happening here is that GA fires a fire arrow, an explosive arrow up into the ceiling, and this begins to take down the tower, which is on the verge of falling over anyway, but this assures that it's actually going to fall over. Also, the arrow is about to hit Kalik, and Aang actually saves her in the middle of the fight and also saves her from the fall. So Kalik immediately has this moment of like, oh, he showed compassion to us even though we come across as like bandits to him. And so there's a sense that there's going to be an arc here. But the plot jumps into action here because the Sonam relic breaks, but inside is a map. She takes it and the Denied kind of like head off at this point. We'll get to the Avatar State bit in a second, but what were your thoughts on this initial fight here, Aang versus these 4 main Denied characters?
Yeah, no, I think the fight was pretty good. I think, like you said, it's pretty representative of Aang's sort of abilities here. I mean, obviously it's a lot more refined than what we have seen in the past here. So his, ability to sort of move around pretty quickly and sort of to dodge their attacks. I mean, it also shows you quite how proficient, these non-benders are in their own sort of skills and their sort of abilities here. I think is very cool to see, their varied weapons, CGA with the Yu Yang archer sort of skills and stuff like that. So it definitely, they cover sort of the gamut that you want in sort of like a four group sort of bruiser group that's sort of going against our main person. And yeah, he probably could sort of, take them out relatively quickly. He does do the one airbending move that does push them all away pretty quickly here, but it's still, it's not such of a force that they can't all sort of recover from that sort of move. So he's still sort of, tempering his sort of abilities here. He's not going, Avatar state inside of the temple, which he probably wouldn't do just because he's trying not to destroy things. So it definitely has that sort of, a bit of a comedic element to sort of the fight where he's not trying to sort of do everything crazy because he wants to sort of preserve things, which was the reason why he was there in the first place here. So no, I think this initial part of the fight here and everything goes pretty well in showing sort of both sides' abilities and how they both can be pretty dangerous.
Mm-hmm. With the denied characters, I do find it interesting that they are led by a Yu Yan archer, because I do want to know more about this character as their leader. Is she the founder of the group? The fact that she is a Yu Yan archer, that would potentially imply that she was a part of the Fire Nation military, as far as we're aware. That's what the Yu Yan archers are like attached to at this point. And then there's also just that idea of like, she would have one of the like top tier non-bender skills, being a Yuan archer, this like elite level archer with borderline spiritual level accuracy, but she still feels that bending is kind of what she needs. So I am very interested to see if they just add like a little bit more depth to kind of her as a character, in that like, is she meant to, over the course of this movie, be kind of almost like framed as like a bit of a hypocrite, because she'll start to kind of like almost manipulate Kalik over the idea of like, you lost your family in the war, and she tries to kind of almost blame it on Aang for being missing, yet she potentially could have been part of the Fire Nation military. But did you have any thoughts about that, her as a Yu Yan archer?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things that stands out because we know of their history and we know of their sort of pedigree and their sort of, abilities that, like you said, yes, it almost seems like it's supernatural how sort of accurate they are. And, it does make you wonder just sort of their training. Like, is that sort of like on the level of, having to be a combustion bender, or is it something, maybe less crazy than that? But yeah, I mean, just the idea that, as far as we know, most of them are part of the Fire Nation military. Now, we know that's not always true, and there are others who haven't been part of it, and there's, ones who have been sort of like outcasted from the military or from sort of the Union archers and stuff like that. So, she could potentially not be part of them, I guess you could say, but it's a high chance from what we know, at least, that she is. So it definitely feels like there's potential there to be some sort of, contradictions, which just makes the idea of her character more interesting, right? So if we do get more information about her sort of in the novelization, that definitely would be pretty cool. But yeah, I think just the idea of the denied in general and sort of their structure, their organization, however you want them to be, if they're like, proto sort of non-bender sort of extremists, that's, I don't know, it's just an interesting idea, and it definitely it gives you something to go against in the movie as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we continue on. Aang eventually kind of wakes up after his fall and immediately goes into outside to save the falling structure here, the temple tower. He does this not in the Avatar state, but he has to enter the Avatar state to actually maneuver it back into position. So he's powerful enough to kind of block the fall on his own, but needs the Avatar state to fix it, basically. And this also serves the effect of he saves the denied again, because the temple was about to smash through their airship. So multiple times he saves them here, and also saves the tower as well. But of course, he's lost a bunch of relics along the way. And yeah, he then heads onto Appa to head back to the city to kind of inform the team and Katara about kind of what's happened. But he has been kind of slightly injured here, like a cracked rib or something like that, and perhaps seems to be the case here. So an interesting kind of opening sequence here. And yeah, this one just feels kind of perfectly done of like, yeah, in your opening sequence, you had to show some usage of the Avatar state and him using it to kind of save people, save an aspect of like his home is a pretty nice kind of usage of that. I know a lot of people probably would have wanted a bit more application of power, but it's thematically, the way he does it is, I think, quite nice. But what are your thoughts on the end of this opening sequence?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this was a pretty good sort of use case for the Avatar state. It's something that, he wouldn't necessarily be able to do under his own sort of normal power, but, with the Avatar state, he's able to do it relatively easy. I mean, I think, maybe the fact that he was injured factored into him sort of, passing out at the end there less so just the usage of power itself, maybe. I don't know. There's a couple of different ways, but he's definitely, beat up after that fight, even if it, could have been potentially sort of, ended different ways here. But no, I thought this was cool just to get to see him use the Avatar spirit as an older person, which is something, we're always wondering, like, how well, how good, how easy is his sort of command over the Avatar spirit when he gets more mature and he's more sort of in tune with himself.
Mm-hmm. Then we go into the movie's version of the kind of classic Avatar intro, going through the elements and also some kind of backstory to get people up to speed here. This is, I suppose, especially the part after the kind of classic kind of fire, earth, air, water bit. I think it's mostly here for kind of like returning fans, but still cool stuff here as we see each of the kind of new voice actors for the characters narrate. We see Katara says, "Water, her tribes gather strength from the moon and flow with the tides." As we see ATLA era Katara transition into her movie design. So we do get this really early, quick look at them as adults here. So we go through Katara, Toph, Zuko, and then Aang, of course, for air. And then, yeah, we get the explanation of what the Avatar is. He can bend all four elements. And he has to keep the nations in balance. But when that responsibility fell to him as a child, he ran away. And yeah, he was caught in a storm, but his Avatar spirit preserved him in a sphere of energy for 100 years. And again, it's a slightly more kind of like modern way in which they refer to the kind of like the boy in the iceberg bit of like, they have taken to very much referring to it as it's a sphere of energy. Like, remember, inside it was hollow. Like, it's not just a full-on sphere of ice. Energy was inside, and like they're asking you to realize that, like, oh yeah, it's more of a survival cell type thing because of they're going to use it later on. He's then awoken to find the world out of balance because of war. The air nomads wiped out everyone except him. And then we have some really nice shots here as we montage through him learning the elements from his friends, bravery from Sokka, becoming a family with his team, and ending the war together. And that's sort of the setup for this point. And then the end of this intro here is basically the transition from basically the very end of like ATLA, them looking out at basically Cranefish Town, and it evolving to become Republic City like it now is in this era. So really cool stuff here. I'm a big fan of the way they kind of did this intro here. Makes me excited for what the Seven Havens intro is going to be. But what were your thoughts on how the movie did it?
Yeah, no, I think it feels like a movie level quality sort of recap, intro to the movie and sort of the series and stuff like that, which, of course, a lot of us who are watching this movie, we know the story, but not everyone who watches the movie is going to sort of have the full scope of things. So I think it's, it's good. I think it's good that they put like a good bit of like action beginning and then they did this. So I think that's like a good sequence of events here. But no, I'm fine with this intro. I think it's cool to get to see sort of, our characters that we've seen so long, so much of in sort of the more, updated sort of graphics and designs and stuff like that. So that's a nice thing to see, comparing to sort of the old ones. So I really like that sort of approach in general.
So yeah, then we get our first kind of shot then after this, which is that we go into Republic City. Some cool stuff here. We see Chong and the nomads on the streets. We see the cabbage merchant. We see, I guess, some of the first children of the kind of nations kind of coming together here, which is kind of cool. Some early kind of Mako and Bolins, I guess. As we cut to Katara, the council representative here, giving a speech for the opening of the new Unity Tower, which has just been finished being built on the kind of main Republic City. And she highlights that the whole idea of this is that Republic City was built on an ancient site. That's interesting. And that she says that here in this sequence. The tower represents the city bringing the nations together after so much conflict. She unfurls the 4 nation banners, one for each element. And you do know that you kind of swing through the crowd here. All the elements are represented except air. And air is only represented when Aang arrives in on Appa here. We get the foamy mouth guy returns, now with a wife and child, and another child on the way. So that's fun, highlighting that, more people left Kyoshi Island to come to the city. That's cool. And yeah, immediately when he arrives, Katara meets up again with Momo, Appa, and immediately kind of hugs and kisses Aang, highlighting that they are together, have been together in a relationship for quite a while at this point. The movie itself never confirms if they're married at this point, and I'm not sure if any of the creators or anything like that have come out and specifically said if they are or not. But still, it's really clear that they've been together for a really long time, and that's really nice to see. But yeah, what are your thoughts here on Katara's speech here, the opening of Unity Tower?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good setup. I think it's nice to see her in this, leadership position, her being on the council and her sort of making this dedication to, where they're at right now in Republic City and just sort of the state of affairs in the world and how they're still, working and hoping and, doing the best they can to sort of keep people together and to show that, this idea of being able to live together in peace is actually something that they're, continuing and working towards, striving for. So I like this idea of just seeing her up there in the front, leading the way, and getting to see Aang just sort of come out of nowhere, and people, of course, being excited about it.
Because again, yeah, from the comics, like this whole idea, it is kind of her idea, basically, as we kind of saw from like the promise, effectively, that like. How do you handle these nations coming together? Do you give it all back to one? Do you allow the nation that took over to be in charge? No, kind of make it a nation of nations type thing has always been kind of her approach, and where Aang kind of made his decisions from, which is kind of cool. But yeah, they then cut to, this is Katara's apartment in the city where she heals Aang, and they talk about the Denied. They're growing in number, they're becoming bolder. She's particularly worried that, like, hey, if they're attacking the Avatar, what else are they willing to do? That's kind of crazy. But she's also worried about Aang himself. She notices that he has been spending more and more time alone at the Southern Air Temple, and he says it's how he holds on to his past. She knows how hard it's been for him, and he talks about how in this fight he actually really considered that it could be the end for him and what that would actually mean. No more airbenders, no more air nomads. His culture would die with his death. Katara says that he's not alone. Republic City would not exist without him. He's made this possible, the 4 nations living together. But the only thing that Aang can think about is just that means all nations except his. She notes that the city still needs his protection. He's still the Avatar as well as an airbender. And he's just resolved at this point to find out about Sonam and why they were after the relic. So he's going to talk to the Avatars. Again, I really like this scene. I think it's nice to see them just have this kind of really kind of intimate kind of conversation here about some plot details, but then more specifically just about like what Aang's kind of going through, and just speaking to kind of where we're at, where like Katara, of course, as we saw from her speech, is kind of very focused on the future, what the future is going to be, the ideals that they all believe in, where she's kind of seeing that yeah, Aang is kind of lingering on the past. He has something that definitely he still needs to deal with in relation to him as an air nomad, as an airbender. And she tries to kind of bring him back to kind of his duty as the Avatar, but he still has some stuff to resolve as an airbender, is sort of the whole idea of this movie. That, you know, she's supportive of him, but can't maybe fully understand absolutely everything that he's going through. So it's just a really nice scene between the two of them. But what are your thoughts on this Katara and Aang scene?
Yeah, no, it is a nice scene. I think, it's definitely a more direct way of understanding Aang's headspace right now and how he's really feeling, essentially isolated in sort of the air nomad culture and the idea of him being sort of the only airbender right now at this point in time. And I guess it's one of those things that probably just sort of built up over time, and he's having a harder time sort of connecting and sort of letting go and sort of being part of everything that's around him, and sort of all of the groups as being the Avatar here. So it's another one of those things where like he's not as good at letting go of things as maybe he should be or could potentially be. And this is just something that he's going to have to work on throughout the movie. And, I like that Katara is there to sort of support him and try to sort of understand or, just give ear to what he's sort of saying here and support him in what he's, eventually going to do. And especially with him just about to sort of connect and try to sort of figure out maybe what could potentially be done about the situation.
Mm. Because it is interesting because like he hasn't completely lost sight of the whole ideals of Republic City, because when the conflict ends up happening later on, he is talking about that and defending it. He talks earlier to Taga about this when we get there, and he really does believe in this. It's just he needs to address kind of a lot of stuff. He needs to forgive himself, as we'll kind of get to much later on in the movie. But he has his past life kind of connection scene here. He has all of them to ask potentially about Sonam, who of course he doesn't know is an Avatar yet, so it's just ancient airbender Sonam. We get a really cool visual representation of them as like a spiral that kind of comes out of him. He talks to Roku, of course, first. Why not? Roku immediately doesn't have any idea. Go further back in the cycle. And so we just get this kind of funny montage as like he clearly asks like every Avatar in sequence for like a really long way back, and none of them have any idea about this. And we even get dialogue from like 4 Avatars that we've never really seen before. I think 1 or 2 of them we have like a statue for, where like, oh, this one's clearly that statue, but like no names or anything like that. And the idea is he goes past a couple of them and eventually gets back to this Avatar somewhat far back in the cycle, Avatar Xian. This is Xian. Fun intro here. Where you initially think it's this very intimidating character, but he's actually this tiny little librarian almost Avatar who's very focused on knowledge and what he knows. Basically, if Wan Shi Tong was an Avatar is sort of almost the idea here of this character. Very kind of a quirky character here, asking about the history of footwear. Have we finally got rid of sandals? Nope. Devastated for him. And eventually we get to the idea of like he does in fact know about Sonam. Of if anyone knows about lost information, he does. And he reveals that Sonam is an ancient avatar from the golden age of the airbenders. Her staff could channel the energy of the spirit world, granting the wielder unlimited power. And he reveals that no one can communicate with her. She disappeared so thoroughly that it's like she has never existed at all. Interestingly, he does also say that the staff, if it's actually real, is likely too powerful for anyone, even the Avatar, to possess. Likely explaining why all the information on this whole subject is so obscure. So that's kind of an interesting one in that he calls it right from the start that the staff is probably way too powerful of an object to exist. It probably should be destroyed to prevent a lot of this stuff happening, which ends up actually being the solution here. So Avatar Xian is on the ball here, but what are your thoughts on the whole past Avatar sequence here?
Yeah, no, I think overall it's a good sequence. I like just the initial visual of showing, many of the avatars, in the spiral, sort of the traditional way that we've seen it, I think is, pretty cool. And it just, it sets you up for the stage that Aang's going to have to go back really far to find out information on, whatever the current situation that he's having to sort of deal with here. And, when he does finally get the information, I really do like Jan and sort of his, just his sort of idea and his quirkiness and, just sort of how he's so sort of, I guess, knowledgeable of things. It makes you wonder, like, how far back is he in the cycle compared to where Sonan is, which we, sort of know where she is and stuff like that. So it's definitely, cool to get to see that sort of past and that sort of history and just sort of how it leads them to the future here.
Yeah, because that is the interesting thing. Like, we're on this, we've learned a bit more avatars. Like, at this point, we know that there are about 100 avatars. The information on the website, basically, the Avatar Studios website, probably the only significant piece of information on the whole website is that there's 90 avatars between Yang Chen and Wan. The exact wording allows you to figure out that the way it's going to work out is that Pavi is either going to be the avatar number 100 or 104, if that information is in fact accurate. So that's how many avatars there are across 10,000 years. Sonam is from 5,000 years ago, so yeah, he has to be before that. But yeah, how early are we talking here? We're talking about, does Aang talk to 40 avatars, or does he only get through 25? How far back are we kind of talking here? And it is interesting though that they emphasize him in terms of showing him doing stuff, bending, as mostly doing sand bending to kind of show the kind of sculpture aspect, which is kind of fun detail given that we just had a comic very focused on that. So it's was this from when the water was in the desert? It was an ocean. It's probably before that, but it's interesting to think about. But yeah, the past life stuff is always very, very cool. Just this was always going to be a big moment, I don't know, like in the theater, was there a reaction to past life stuff?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that definitely was a moment where people made noise. There's a couple times for sure.
Yeah, they know that sort of stuff always gets people excited, past avatars. So yeah, that's cool. And yeah, Aang assumes that the map leads to the staff, and the only other piece of information that Jian has is that the legend is that Sonam disappeared with her staff on the peak of Mount Baihu, which is a mountain that apparently Aang knows where it is, so that is an interesting detail. And from there, we get that he leaves a note for Katara, apologizing for leaving so suddenly, and basically says, hey, I'm going on ahead, you assemble the team, follow after me, and we'll kind of get this done. There's a fun scene where he sends messages with different birds of different colors off to the different nations to gather the team together. And it's just a cool scene here of just okay, we have to assemble Team Avatar, which is cool because it's highlighting that initially they're not all together. They're all in different nations, basically. They don't spend every waking hour together combined as a team, which is the way some people almost interpret the dynamic. But this is kind of more normal, that it's like, no, we have to specifically assemble the team off doing different things for this mission overall. While we're here, actually, this kind of brings up the idea of this is one of the scenes where we do see the new Avatarian kind of script that they use as the in-world language of Avatar. It was on the Sonam statue, it's on the letter to Katara, and it will also be on the scroll that Zuko's reading in the next scene here. I think it's pretty cool. I know some people seem to have a really big issue with it because they're kind of taking away some of the more direct kind of Asian influences on Avatar, but I also think it's cool as a fantasy world that we just have our own kind of system as well. I always like it when fictional universes kind of do that sort of thing, and the idea that it's a sort of thing where hey, it's a fun fan thing that you can do. If you get really good at Avatarian, it's this kind of extra language that you kind of have to a certain degree. I think it's fun. I don't read too much into kind of why they decided to change it or anything like that, but it just adds a unique kind of visual flair to Avatar. More highlighting it's inspired by that stuff, not that it is all these other countries. But what are your thoughts on Avatarian?
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely can understand why it seems kind of odd that they would change it after all this time here. But I mean, I think, I don't know, it kind of makes sense that, if a world is more sort of, fantasy, that it would sort of have its own distinct thing and it wouldn't be as, tied into the real world. I think it's just unfortunate that they, didn't start with that idea. So they're sort of like, it's definitely, it feels like from that aspect that they're sort of going back with it. But, it is cool that it is unique, that you could sort of, understand it yourself, but I mean, you could do that with the other one too if you happen to know it as well. So I don't know. It's interesting for sure. I think, I don't know, in some ways it makes more sense to me to have that as sort of like a future language than sort of like a past language. So that part, kind of goes back and forth with me in terms of like, the evolution of language over the time. Like it makes sense to me that if you're in like, Seven Havens where things have been sort of uprooted and you've lost your past and stuff like that, like maybe there would be sort of a big sort of reset of language and stuff like that, versus in the past it would sort of be, different in comparison. So I don't know. I'm kind of split depending on what sort of shows and how effective I think it actually is. But in terms of something in general, I think, it's fine enough. I probably wouldn't have even really have noticed it unless it was, mentioned that much.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see, like for instance, straight away, this, I assume, has to be what they also show for Seven Havens stuff, because it would be weird if immediately it's inconsistent and like we're back to like the Chinese characters for Seven Havens, and we get a comic at some point in the next kind of year and they're back to the other stuff. They have to just be like, no, this is what it is, and kind of commit to it at this point, and that's cool. I'm interested to see if they do put out anything like official that like actually is like an official thing to allow you to kind of learn how to do the translation back and forth. Fans have figured it out. There's like a site out there that I think that's pretty good about it. It's pretty cool. The basic idea of it, if I was reading all this correctly, is just that each symbol in Avatarian relates to like a phonetic sound in English. So you're not like spelling the word out, you're like sounding the word out. So like you spell it with the sounds. So it's kind of interesting in that, like, if you do translate something, you do immediately have the pronunciation as well, though you might not have the exact spelling, I think, because of the way that all kind of exactly works. There's some weirdness to it because there are kind of like null kind of filler characters to make the blocks kind of work. But it doesn't seem like crazy complicated, but it's I think it's more so a thing probably for the real kind of heavy lore people to focus on, so that like if you do see something in the background you can just like translate it. But yeah, I hope they officially release the kind of what each symbol kind of refers to situation. Maybe the art book will have it. But yeah, we'll continue on here. So yeah, we then get the assembling of Team Avatar here. So first of all, we go to the Fire Nation. So we go to Harry Bulkan, Royal Caldera City, whatever way you want to call it. Fire Lord Zuko is told about a Fire Nation vessel that came into contact with the Denied, who are a group who have been robbing ancient sites. So that is a little bit of detail that has been, that gives you a little bit of context. So like this is how they eventually came across the information about Sonam, is that they've just been going crazy into anything ancient to find a pathway to bending, and that's what they're kind of about. The meeting is interrupted by a soldier delivering a message from Aang, of course. It's very casual and informal here, of course, because they're friends, even though this meeting is super formal. And yeah, Aang needs Zuko's help immediately, and Zuko is going to give it, even though he is the Fire Lord, and that's the whole idea here. Zuko's introduction is quite interesting in that they really don't want to bring in any of the other Zuko-related characters. Like his family isn't here, May isn't here, all that sort of stuff. It's just him and kind of Chamberlains and soldiers, and no other characters you recognize here. That will be saved for the next project, I guess. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Zuko's introduction?
Yeah, no, I thought this was cool. I mean, definitely gives you, sort of the idea of him leading the country now and his sort of, imposing presence. Although it's not sort of like as sort of dark and sort of ominous as it was before. You know, it's a bit more sort of open, at least it's like, you know, during the day or setting. So, you know, I like that sort of aspect of it compared to what we've seen before. It's still pretty imposing and still feels very sort of, you know, royal kingdom sort of leadership type thing compared to a lot of the other places, but that has been sort of the culture of the Fire Nation, so I guess he didn't like immediately do away with all of those sort of aspects here. But no, it's a fun scene. You know, it's nice. You know, the contrast of the message versus the setting that he's in. So they did a good job with that comedic bit.
Mm-hmm. We then go to the Southern Water Tribe here to bring Sokka into play. So we get to see Wolf Cove in this era, even more developed compared to like North and South and stuff like that. Sokka is presenting the idea for the Sokka cycle to some Southern Water Tribe kids, which includes some waterbenders, which is kind of pretty fun. And yeah, basically the Sokka cycle is this flying bicycle thing. The kids question the bike's usefulness when bending is a thing. They even ask why Sokka is on Team Avatar. Why would Aang want you? You're a non-bender. And he goes into kind of great detail explaining his exaggerated, not super exaggerated, it's mostly just the visuals are a bit exaggerated, of his importance to the team in ending the war. They think he's lying until the blue bird arrives and they realize it's from Aang, and then actually they kind of change their tune and actually he was an important member of Team Avatar. So very fun thing here, we get across the idea. Sokka is an inventor in the Southern Water Tribe. That's what he's doing at this point in time. And then the idea is, I guess, at some point he will more assume a leadership position in Republic City. And then eventually he'll become the chief of the South. Or do I have that backwards? I always forget Sokka's kind of vague backstory stuff. But yeah, that is how Sokka is introduced. And again, they also, for the most part, avoid introducing us to other characters. So there's no Hakoda here or anything like that. No Melina. Not that I was expecting that, but still, that idea. Your thoughts on Sokka's introduction?
No, this seems on brand for his character, like him working on some idea, some crazy contraption that, of course, later on becomes relevant. And him sort of, you know, trying to oversell maybe his importance of things, but like you said, maybe it is more just sort of the visual, which is interesting and kind of cool that they sort of completely do a different style for those frames that they're sort of showing there, which kind of goes along with the lines of his sort of, you know, mental processes, just mental idea of what sort of happened in the past versus maybe what literally happened there. But no, it's a fun, especially with the kids sort of not believing him at all, which is pretty sort of standard fare until sort of the bird comes and then he has to join Team Avatar and everything like that. So no, I think this is a fun sort of setup for him.
Mm-hmm. Then we go to the Earth Kingdom, Toph's metal bending academy here. And yeah, she just spars with her metal bending students, which include Hotun and the Dark One from the comics. And yeah, the students are quite impressive, but Toph is on a whole other level. She never uses her hands. She dodges all their attacks and effortlessly basically kind of defeats them all, rolling them all up into this big ball of metal until they like land right in front of her, which is when the message from Aang comes in and Hotun reads it out to her. Pretty perfect Toph introduction here. I have to assume this one probably came quite easy to them in terms of just like, yeah, this is the really obvious comic reference. Just show her being cool at the Metal Bending Academy with other metal benders to set up the future of metal bending. So kind of cool. Some of the most obvious comic references in the movie as well. Though, interestingly, no Penga. That's interesting. There are other students, but like Penga's whole thing was that she was kind of really kind of flashy and wore kind of fancy outfits. She kind of cared about her appearance. There's no way I think they'd just have her be one of the random girl students in the background. If she was going to be here, I think they would have had her be here. So there's a bit of a story, I guess, to what happens here, though. I guess in like 10-ish years, it makes sense that this trio of other metal benders doesn't always stay together, but it's still an interesting choice that they didn't keep that trio together. But what are your thoughts on Toph's introduction?
Yeah, I guess if there was one that maybe dropped out, maybe she would be the one. But no, I think overall, like you said, this is pretty much on par introduction to, or reintroduction to Toph and just sort of her over-the-top awesomeness and metal bending, which is, you know, unique to her character and sort of what we've seen of her up until this point. So no, I enjoyed this one.
And then we cut out of this, of course, we've introduced the team here. So we go deep into the mountains, which I have to assume are just somewhere in the north. They don't ever actually clarify exactly where Mount Baihu is in the world. I hope the novel gives us some context for that. The only thing we have is just that when he gets high enough, there are spirit lights in the sky. The Everstorm would be active in the south, which would prevent southern spirit lights. So it kind of has to, I guess, be more towards the north. How far are we away from the Northern Air Temple? Not really sure. But either way, the weather is absolutely crazy because of how high up this thing. Also, it's a mountain, but it's very much just like a column almost straight up. It's not really much of a a slope necessarily. It's just like a sheer vertical face. So it's a really tough thing to climb up. He tries to use his bending in various ways, but he has to be more subtle here because he might risk tearing down the whole mountain. He might get caught in the wind if he tries to overly use air bending here. He just tries to be kind of careful as he makes his way up. He does lose his hat along the way. I wonder, is there a story behind that I don't know, did Katara make it for him or something like that? Again, might be a novel detail that they do. But yeah, he makes his way eventually up to the top, above the cloud level here. So the peak of Mount Baihu, you can't see from the ground at all. And when he gets up there, there's a kind of wall of snow and ice. He kind of clears the snow out of the way, and he's looking at someone encased in ice in this mountain. And it's this complete reversal for him as a character. He was found by Katara and Sokka in ice. He now finds someone in ice in the same sort of way. It's glowing on the inside. Who is this man in the ice? Really kind of cool, like, way to kind of like build to the introduction of Taga here. But what are your thoughts on the climbing Mount Baihu sequence?
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels pretty epic in order to get up this mountain. I think, you see some things where people saying like, oh, maybe there would have been an easier way to do it, but this feels like a pretty imposing mountain to climb that even if you had sort of, extra abilities, it still would be pretty hard to do on its own. So I don't know. It definitely feels like it's one of those, like, I don't know, on the level of like a Mount Everest type thing if we're compared to something in the real world where it's just, that high up and that sort of dangerous, especially with sort of all the, I guess you could say, spiritual influence to this, location and stuff like that, that it has, such a hard ability to climb up there. But no, I think, it definitely is a cool sort of setup for him to finally get to the top and to see, someone in, the mountain and sort of being, quartered off here in what looks like, what he would have been in.
Mm-hmm. I have noticed online that a lot of people try to criticize this in a later scene as well, with the idea that like Aang should just use some crazy powerful earthbending maneuver and just like earth elevator himself like up the side of this kind of mountain. And I'm like, sure,
yeah, that's all right.
Like he could go into the Avatar state and go up in the kind of ball of elements and stuff like that, I suppose, if he wanted to. But like, it's sort of the idea that I suppose they're trying to present the idea that the weather is so extreme that his normal kind of bending abilities would be kind of pushed to their absolute limits here. So he has to kind of be careful. It's a big mountain, but it's not like that big. So he could actually like affect it enough to kind of break it down, as we kind of see. There's some of that stuff where it's just like you have to let them kind of put the characters in danger. And I think they do a decent enough kind of job at that here, that like I don't think Aang is like being silly for the way he ascends the mountain, but it is what it is. But yeah, we then get him freeing this person from the ice. So he uses waterbending to crack it open here. Before he can fully like meet the person though, the mountain begins to kind of fall apart because the energy was sort of almost like a keystone effectively of it. Because maybe I'm wrong on this, but like later on there seems to be the implication that Mount Baihu only exists because Sonam like made it to imprison him in. Some of the visuals from the fight as they kind of show it later on kind of imply that, but it's a little bit unclear. So it would make sense that, like, okay, this is what it's here for. Now with the energy gone, the mountain kind of falls apart, and yeah, a whole chunk, the whole top half of it kind of begins to fall off. And we get, again, this other really cool kind of environmental action set piece thing going on here, where Aang has to try and catch Taga as he falls from the mountain, as Aang falls from the mountain with all this debris. He does catch him, tries to use firebending in the Avatar state to get out of the way, but he's sort of like, he catches Taga like right under like the base of the mountain bit that's falling over, so he's kind of caught like directly underneath it. Again, I think people are being not particularly generous to this scene in terms of just like, go to the side, go to the side. But it's like, the geometry means like, I don't think Aang makes any particularly bad mistake in terms of how he handles this situation. Ultimately, he's falling at a crazy rate of speed. He's barely like preventing them from smashing into the ground, and he's trying to prevent himself from going up into this falling mountain. I think they engineered a situation to where like he will be kind of slightly caught out by this situation. But what are your thoughts on this action set piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was pretty, interesting, pretty impactful. I think it definitely shows you that, this mountain is sort of falling on him essentially. And, that shows you like, it's a strong mountain and it's high up there, but it's not so sort of weak that, he couldn't have upset it, which is maybe why he didn't go crazy with going up to it in the first place. But I don't know. I mean, I think the scene where, they show it falling and he's in the Avatar state and he's doing sort of the fire booster to sort of get out of it, I think it does a pretty good job of showing like the scale of this, and it's not something that you can just sort of like lean to the side and sort of get away from. I don't know, maybe if he had more time he definitely sort of could have, but it definitely seems pretty huge, especially when you see it from later on from sort of the perspective of our other characters. You can tell that it's a pretty sort of big thing that requires you to have enough time to get out from underneath. But I think it's definitely a cool falling scene. I think any sort of scenes where you have like all the characters moving with stuff falling with them at the same time and you're in the air for especially a extended period of time, I think it does a good job of sort of just visually showing you all the craziness that's going on around you.
Yeah, and then I seen some people suggest like, could he not just have done some crazy earth bending and like tunneled through the mountain? I think that's just an inherently like dangerous thing to try and do, no matter how powerful an earthbender you are, because like you're trusting your powerful earthbending to tunnel through this very like dynamic falling mountain thing, where like, what path are you making? How does that work? And especially because you'd have to use the Avatar state to do it, like the risk to the cycle is like quite high at that point. And again, I think Aang's approach tends to be like, evade, get out of the way if at all possible. So yeah, I think they do a good job of creating like, this makes sense to be a moment of tension that requires kind of Taga to deal with here. But yeah, as they're falling, the guy wakes up. He catches Aang, reveals he's an airbender with unique tattoos. He stabilizes them in the air. As they hit the ground, he airbends up and somehow temporarily manages to keep the thing from falling. And this is when Appa comes in and Aang kind of gets the two of them out of there. So the mountain kind of falls. There's a little bit of a sequence afterwards where like Appa kind of goes through the debris, but the team does manage to kind of make it out of this situation. And so yeah, the team is like, why'd you go off on your own? But wait, who is this guy? And Aang's like, he's an airbender, as Taga passes out. So really cool stuff as we've kind of found, fully claimed the prize from the top of the mountain. It's not the staff, it's not Sonam, it's this mysterious airbender whose name we don't know yet. But still, just inherently cool that like this is the main dynamic of this movie. Aang meets another airbender, one who has been frozen in this tall mountain. Like, he was frozen under the sea, someone was frozen in a mountain above the clouds. It's a kind of cool kind of contrast there, using the same kind of mechanism ultimately. And it's like, this just is inherently a very exciting plot point in the movie for me, Aang meeting another airbender. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this sequence here as they kind of save Taga here?
Yeah, no, I think it does. It's very cool. Just the similarities. Like you never want things to retread too much, but some comparison, especially with the movie all being about Aang. It kind of leads itself to having someone else in a sort of similar situation here. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to see this the first time, and to see another Airbender, and one that seemingly is very very strong as well, and also able to do similar techniques that what Aang can do, just to a very much larger degree, without obviously any sort of avatar state enhancements. That just sets off all the sort of alarm bells of interesting, cool things to potentially come in the future, and how this could relate to things later on here. So no, I thought this was definitely a cool sort of sequence to show Aang being saved here right at the end.
Mm-hmm. When they head back to camp, we see that Zuko's airship is here. Katara heals him and notes that his chi is strong, like nothing she has ever felt, which is quite interesting to kind of think about there. And that obviously speaks to how powerful he is, but also, as we learn as the movie goes on, he's also had some other crazy energy stuff happen to him with regards to how he has his bending in the first place, but then the fact that he's undergone like a spirit transformation prior to this, which for him, he was in that form only like an hour ago. Like that's the interesting kind of idea here. So he's still, I guess, partially like empowered by that, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. But either way, the main thing that someone talking about chi typically brings up in Avatar is just, okay, it's a power level type thing. It's kind of like Dragon Ball. Like this is his like power level. He's got big chi. But yeah, the cool scene here, because they do show his full kind of tattoos as like he's introduced as Katara is healing him. So all the thoughts are going through your head here about this, and they immediately address in the dialogue of like, oh, those are ancient tattoos. Now, this is one where maybe it seems like there's maybe like a deleted scene or something like that, because as the movie goes on, they gradually like just say kind of the timeline where he comes from, and that like they say ancient here. I think Katara at some point says thousands of years old, but then I think Sokka later on in the movie just says 5,000 years old. So I'm guessing there might have been like a cut scene where they somehow specifically found out how old he was. But what are your thoughts just on the design of Taga here as an ancient airbender?
Yeah, no, I think the design, works well, because I mean we've seen other places or other instances of ancient airbender tattoos, and this definitely feels like this is along the middle ground of those sort of tattoos, because you can sort of see the similarities, how it might be sort of closer to Aang's tattoos, but it's still it's still different as enough that you can tell that it's from some other era than what they're currently in. At least if we're going with the idea of them, being more complex and stuff to being simplified later on. So I like that sort of idea, and just the character design overall I think is cool. I definitely you can immediately get the vibes that okay, he's maybe good, but he maybe is probably not good, and eventually we learn how that all sort of plays out, stuff like that. So I think they do an interesting design with just the character overall and his sort of relation to sort of the air nomad culture, and just sort of what you kind of expect from Avatar characters, good or bad. So, there's that whole sort of like, just history of how they've designed characters in the past that sort of comes into play here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because like Taga's airbender tattoos are not like unique. Like Sonam has very unique tattoos, but he seems to have the more standard ones of that era. Though it's a little bit unclear perhaps if like, are these like a new type of tattoo introduced for people who get airbending via the staff, because it kind of incorporates the symbols that are on the staff into it, but that might be something for maybe the novel to dive into in terms of like how many normal airbenders versus how many kind of ones made with the staff were there. That whole idea, it's interesting. But Taga wakes up, has a bit of a reaction to seeing Toph earthbending. So straight away, really cool visual idea of like getting across all this detail of like, oh, in his era there was like the Earth Kingdom was a villainous force, straight away kind of presented there, which is cool. She wants to know if he's attractive immediately, and you get that kind of fun moment that's been kind of spread around so much. It was part of the initial leaks. So very fun scene there. And yeah, Aang has to kind of convince him, you're with friends, like you're okay. He asks where Avatar Sonam is, and that's interesting when you reflect on kind of what happens with him, and that, like, again, an hour or two ago he was fighting her, that's why he's asking, but he's obviously just confused out of his era, so Aang has to reveal he's the Avatar now, which means that Sonam is dead. But then also, when Sokka comes in, they have to reveal the idea that Aang is the last airbender as well. And his mood really darkens. He kind of panics when he finds out that, like, he and Aang are the last two airbenders here. And he immediately starts asking about Sonam's staff, which is kind of interesting because that's what we're looking for. And it's their only hope now. And Aang's confused about this because, wait, what do you mean the staff is our hope? I thought it was just a weapon that gives you, like, spirit energy powers. That's what it was told to be before. But this is where we get our first backstory to Jirana, as Taga reveals that the staff is a gift. The staff allowed Sonam to channel the energy of the spirit world. It allowed Jirana to flourish and become the greatest city in the world. Note, this is where they visually confirm that the location of Jirana was where Republic City now is. So that's an important piece of continuity to kind of realize. The ancient site that Katara mentioned before, I think she was primarily referring to, like, I'm guessing from her perspective at that point in time, like cranefish, Tianhanxi, as being the kind of things that we knew about before, but that it also predates that as well, going back to, like, Jirana as well. And so, yeah, the continuation of this is then, Jirana was an air nomad utopia where Sonam led a golden era of balance. It was here that he devoted himself to serving her, and in return she used the staff to make him a lowly non-bender, an airbender. He was the first to become an airbender via this method, but he was not the last, and she filled the skies with airbenders, and they flew by her side, spreading peace across the world. Very cool detail here as we get the reveal that this is one thing the staff can do. The staff has the power of line turtles and can actually make people specifically it's an airbender here. So it can't make anyone a bender of any type. It's specifically an airbending staff that can give people airbending. So that's very cool. And to find out that Taga is one of these ones who was given it via this method is just a really cool detail. But what are your thoughts on the first insight into Jirana from 5,000 years ago?
Yeah, no, I think this is a great setup for this idea of there being this other age of airbenders that was, pretty successful in what they were doing, or at least for a period of time they were, and they were able to sort of even increase their numbers through spiritual means to sort of help further their endeavors and stuff like that. So he definitely sets the stage that it was like a good time, that everything was set up and everything was good and stuff like that, which I think I don't know if that's the idea of him sort of leading to his eventual sort of betrayal of things, or this is just sort of what he really felt in sort of the initial times of everything that they were doing on before he sort of went towards the more darker side of things. But it definitely it's always cool when we get to see sort of another era of the Avatar, especially when they sort of change up sort of the art style a bit, so you get to really sort of feel the idea that this was a different era compared to what we're seeing right now. So I like that whole sort of setup of things.
Yeah, really cool, because it's not just like, oh, this is only a few eras back, and it's like the politics are a little bit different. Like we're pre-Four Nations here, so like we really don't know kind of what exactly is going on. So the idea that like the air nomads were the kind of most successful kind of nation to a certain degree at this point in time is fascinating, and that like it was mostly elemental tribes apart from them is really, really interesting to consider. Yeah, we get some nice visuals here of the Temple of Jirana, but also a different type of like ancient sky bison with the kind of crazy long curvy horns, and also the little chin beard thing as well. That's Taga's bison. So that's kind of fun. Just a slight different kind of variation. But I like the aftermath of this backstory as well. Like Aang needs to go outside to get some air because this means so much is possible for him. Like, he's shocked and stunned, but then this grin kind of comes on his face because we can bring airbenders back. And I like that the whole team is really excited about this. They're excited for Aang as well. Katara hugs him, and Zuko gets one of his most kind of significant moments in the movie as well, because he comes over and it's like, this offers a chance to heal the greatest atrocity the Fire Nation committed in the war. This will be the final step to rebuilding the world. And so, like, this is why they're all here for Aang on this mission, because they think that, like, the staff as a way to bring back airbenders, 100%, like, this is absolutely kind of ideal. There's definitely a sense that the team maybe doesn't fully think it through in the context maybe of the Denied, in that, like, should there be this staff that, like, we're in control of and we decide who's going to be airbenders? Won't that cause problems kind of by itself? But they're just so happy for, like, the actual potential to bring the fourth nation back. And it's just, I think, a really kind of a hype moment in the movie where it's like, anyone asking, like, why do they bother having the other characters involved here? It's because the other characters care for Aang. Of course they'd be there for him. And this moment, I think, really shows that. But what are your thoughts on Aang's reaction to this backstory, and specifically what the staff does?
Yeah, no, it feels like it's a good lead in and reason for everything that he's been dealing with up until this point here. So it seems like an easy, solution for him, essentially. And, that's probably why, they don't think of sort of like the larger implications of bringing back a nation that hasn't existed for, over 100 years. Like, sure, there's like tons of political and social economic reasons, and like, just, all these sort of different things that, deal with, bringing back a group of people and giving them sort of abilities that would probably, upset the current balance of things, which of course is, completely contradictory towards, what the Avatar is supposed to be there for, right? So sure, there's a lot of things with it, but I think it's, one of those things where they're just sort of like leaping into the situation, and maybe this is just sort of their, little bit of a lack of maturity as a group, as sort of young adults here, compared to where they are later on when, they're like elder statesmen and stuff like that. So you definitely get sort of, maybe sort of the younger aspects of our characters, even if they are, older than, any other sort of iteration that we've seen of them up until this point. So they're not fully mature yet, as we do see them later on, or even some sort of like of the flashbacks that we see in Korra's time here. They're still, pretty young at doing things here, especially with Aang sort of, having all of these issues with dealing with, the current state of things and his people and lack of his people here. So it's definitely one of those things where it definitely feels like, Taka's able to sort of maybe even initially sort of read the situation to lead things towards where he wants things to actually be.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll just wrap it up with this next little sequence here. They have to explain to Taga who the Denied are, why they'd beat after the staff as well, which obviously implies that, I guess the information they got must have included information on the staff specifically. So I kind of really want to know where they got that from. Did they raid the Dragonbone catacombs or something like that, or the Sun Warriors or something like that? That's that. He realizes there's only one place the staff could be, and he's like, "Ready, Appa, we're going out." And he basically says that they're going to travel across the endless ocean. And Zuko notes that that's on the other side of the world. There's nothing out there. Taga says there's an island out there, and it won't be an easy journey. They can make it, but he's referring to himself, Appa, and Aang, the airbenders. And he laughs when Katara says that they should all get going. He says that the skies are no place for a water child, which kind of annoys her. She's like, we do things together here. And Aang eventually convinces Taga like that they're all going to go. And this is when they finally do ask for his name. So, and then the final thing we'll just include in this is that they're going on the airship, so Taga gets introduced to the concept of like technology. Here's a metal giant sky bison thing, and you see that he is very much the man out of time, even more so than the way Aang was with the 100 years, and that like he's 5,000 years out of time. Really kind of fun stuff here as we get the introduction of all these characters here. The water child bit is interesting in that, like, is that an insult? I don't really think so. I think this is just like him kind of being like, airbenders in the air, I wouldn't ask for my place on the water type thing. And it's just that aspect. Obviously, as part of his kind of manipulations to a certain degree, he wants to only go with Aang, but I don't think that term is like particularly like overly bad, because it just feels like very much like that more ancient kind of free flowing air nomad thing, that they all would have names like that, air child, and especially the whole eternal wind kind of thing, the mantra of the air nomads that they bring up. It feels very much like they'd call people that. But what are your thoughts on this kind of final sequence for this episode?
Yeah, it definitely is sort of played up for laughs there, and I guess it could be taken a couple of different ways there. But yeah, I thought it was more just sort of him just sort of recognizing what she is, and I don't know, maybe more the insult just that he's calling her a child versus anything else is sort of, getting to her as well there. But no, I think it's, it's a nice setup for the mission that they're going to go on here, and sort of him sort of wanting to do it sort of solo because he knows that it's that sort of journey, even though it's so far away. So I don't know, it's interesting just the idea of, getting more perspective of the world, and that there's, farther places that we haven't even considered exploring. We don't know how, back and far the development of things they thought of these sort of things, if that was always sort of thing, or if that's sort of just made up for, this movie, and that's sort of adding to the lore. But, it kind of fits with this whole sort of idea of there being sort of like a fantasy world, that there's some place that's really far to get to that you don't really can get to because there's something in the way, which it seems that they know of it, but they don't know exactly sort of what's in the way or what's, going to be along their route towards getting to it, because maybe there might have been some sort of earlier discussion about how they're actually going to do that there before sort of jumping in. But this definitely feels like it's another situation where Team Avatar is just sort of like jumping into the situation and maybe not necessarily thinking of the full sort of plan here. But no, I think it's cool, and it's nice to get to see the one up on Taga when he has to sort of realize that they have other means of transportation rather than just what he sort of thought they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the world building reveal here of the kind of endless ocean is such a kind of cool thing to see them actually talk about, like the other side of the world. I did like deep dives into this in my videos and stuff like that, and people highlighted that, like, oh yeah, like I think in an interview from like years ago they did mention this. I forgot to kind of check it up again, but I'm pretty sure someone referenced that, like they did an interview in like the summer of 2007 where they did casually like mention that, like, oh yeah, all the nations are on one like hemisphere of the world, and then they just kind of left it at that, like the other sides kind of like doesn't really have anything out there. And it's just like, okay, just interesting world building. So they had some sort of a plan in terms of just wanting a empty whole other side of the world for whatever reason. So it's a cool thing that like they finally got to reveal that. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I don't think we quite got to the halfway point here, but again, we had a whole comic to discuss, and there was actually quite a bit of news. We'll cover the rest next time out, where we'll have less pages of comics, I think, to go over for the next podcast with Masters of the Elements. But yeah, that has been episode 309 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.